The system named me Im-san, listed my strength as ordinary person and my talent as none, and calmly informed me at the bottom of the panel that I was guaranteed not to survive past 4 days. Then the Lighthouse Survival Talent Draw spun a fourth slot nobody else's panel had, and Gift of Fate slid into my chest as a unique pull that paired with the Key of Fate to garble a path profession the system itself could not read. The boy it had sentenced just got handed the cheat. Real quick, like the video and subscribe. It costs nothing and the algorithm thanks you. The story begins long before any of this. Let me show you. The wooden bed under me let out a long dry groan, and I came awake muttering at the noise before I had even pried my eyes open. The ceiling I was staring at was not mine. Dark planks, warped, riddled with knotholes that let in slivers of gray daylight, looking like the whole thing might come down on my head if I sneezed. I sat up too fast, the bedboards complaining all over again, and that was when I realized I had no idea where I was. The room was tiny, maybe 6 square meters wall to wall, and every piece of it had the same exhausted look as the bed, a wooden table that had seen better decades, a wooden door so warped that the gaps in the frame whistled with the draft. 2 windows in matching condition, framing nothing but white. I climbed down, scratched my head, and walked over to the table because the table was the only thing in the room that mattered. 3 items sat on it, plus a piece of withered parchment so blank it looked like a dare. I reached for the parchment, and it answered me first. The instant my fingers brushed it, the thing leapt off the table, rows of unreadable characters bleeding across its surface. And before I could pull back, it had collapsed into a single beam of light and lanced straight into the space between my eyebrows. I staggered, rubbed my forehead, and was halfway through cursing the room when a soft chime rang inside my skull and a projection lit up in front of me like a floating computer monitor. The screen welcomed me to something called Lighthouse Survival and informed me that I, along with every other tower guardian, would now be following a strict set of rules if I cared to keep breathing. The lighthouse was my sanctuary and I was expected to upgrade it. The island was the foundation of my resources, and I was expected to upgrade that too. The lighthouse fire dispelled the sea mist, and I was warned to keep it burning at night, because the mist was very dangerous. Islands experienced tidal phenomena, and the receding tide would leave behind treasure chests, sea beasts, and basic resources. There were 3 newbie benefits on the table in front of me: a random island, a random lighthouse, and a random talent. The first 3 days were the newbie benefit period, during which treasure chest spawns were doubled, and sea beasts would not attack me without provocation, with the one exception that the sea beasts guarding chests would attack anyone who approached. The weather during all 3 of those days would hold it breezy and sunny. Lighthouse Survival, a survival story. I had read enough raft survival, ocean survival, and eldritch survival novels in my old life to recognize the shape of the genre. But recognizing a thing in fiction and waking up inside it were 2 very different experiences. I sucked in a breath and asked the empty room whether this meant everyone on Earth was here. The old, the weak, the sick, the disabled. Every last one of them dragged along for the ride. The text on the projection faded and an attribute panel slid into its place, listing 5 tabs: personal attribute panel, lighthouse panel, island panel, inventory, and chat channel. A note at the bottom told me today's weather was breezy and sunny, with a rare weather effect attached, meaning that after the tide receded on my island, there was a very small chance a special treasure chest would appear, and that weather effects for most tower guardians were different from each other. I read that twice and admitted that of course mine was the rare one. Day 1. I tapped the personal attribute panel first. My panel listed me as Im-san, strength ordinary person, talent none, abilities none, and at the very bottom an evaluation that ran simply, an ordinary person guaranteed not to survive past 4 days. 4 days! I complained to the panel and asked it whether the moment the newbie period ended I was supposed to keel over on principle, but the panel did not negotiate. The lighthouse panel was next, telling me that this thing I was standing in was a lighthouse, rated white 1 star, with the main effect of white candlelight, no special effect, energy at 100%, and an evaluation that called it a blank slate lighthouse, useless beyond dispelling thin sea mist, but at least the light was still burning. I tapped white candlelight to dig further, and the system told me it was a special item, also white 1 star, with the effect of dispelling sea mist within a 3-meter radius. The lowest grade of lighthouse fire on offer, good for thin mist only, sharply weakened by anything thicker. I glanced around the cramped little room. 3 meters was just enough to cover it. Cozy. I closed that panel and opened the island panel, which informed me I was the proud owner of an ordinary island, white 1 star. No effect, no special effect, an area of 1,000 square meters, and an evaluation that flat out told me I did not even have a coconut tree, and the system was insulted I dared call this place an island. I closed the panel without comment and went straight to the chat channel. There were 2 channels inside, the world chat channel and the regional chat channel. The world chat channel was grayed out, locked, exactly what I expected from a survival story in Act 1. What I did not expect was the player count. Not Earth's 8 or 9 billion, but tens of billions. I rubbed at my eyebrow and muttered that the number was wrong, that there was no way only Earth had been pulled in, that whoever was running this game had cast a wider net than my own planet. The regional chat channel was at least open. The moment I tapped it, the screen filled with bullet comments rolling sideways across the projection like a live stream gone feral. The population counter on the regional chat channel held steady at 888,888,800,000 people per region. I did the math in my head. 100,000 per region times however many regions there were in the world channel meant hundreds of millions. And from there it climbed into numbers I gave up counting. The bullet comments were already moving too fast to follow anyway, full of squeaks and irrelevant banter, and people asking each other whether anyone was still in denial about this being real, so I closed the channel and turned my attention back to the 3 items on the table. The random sealand was an unrated special item that, once used, would generate 3 islands at random and let me pick one. 90% of the time you got a common island, 9% a special island. I used it without ceremony. A spinner popped up. 3 patterns blurred into motion, and a few seconds later the wheel stopped and 3 island portraits filed onto the screen. The first was Coconut Crab Island, white 1 star, 2,000 square meters. Effect listed as a small amount of coconut trees and coconut crabs. The evaluation calling it a perfectly serviceable common island that would at least keep me from starving or dying of thirst in the early stages. Not bad. Coconuts gave me food and water in one package, and the crabs gave me protein. I had no idea what counted as a small amount, but I would have taken Coconut Crab Island as a floor without complaining. The second was Lifeless Barren Island, white 1 star, 3,000 square meters. No effect, no special effect. An evaluation that called it a hellish opener and asked outright whether any sane person would actually choose this. The portrait was nothing but gray reefs and dead ground. Only an idiot would pick it, I muttered, then moved on. The third was Tidal Island, white 1 star, 3,000 square meters. A small amount of tree resources, and a special effect that read, Tidal Effect Doubled. The evaluation called it a rare island that significantly extended low tide, giving me more time to forage, with the trade-off that it was also more likely to attract sea creatures. My eyebrows climbed at a special effect at the bottom of the list, sitting on the only island with green on it. I leaned in and looked at the picture. A beach on one side, a reef field on the other, a dozen or so trees scattered through the middle, and I confirmed Tidal Island without thinking twice. Because a special pull was a special pull. The system asked if I was sure, and when I tapped yes, the screen reported that my island was transforming, and that I should wait. The random lighthouse came next, and 3 dilapidated lighthouses rolled out side by side, all 3 of them basic, none of them carrying so much as an effect, let alone a special effect, identical down to the brick and differing only in silhouette. The luck I had spent on the island had clearly been the whole budget, I muttered, and picked whichever silhouette was easiest on my eyes and confirmed. That left the random talent. Its description said that using it would summon 3 random talents capped at green 9 star, and the evaluation hinted that some lucky few would have a unique talent manifest instead of one of the 3, with the standing recommendation that if I got one I should take it without hesitation. I used it. The projection did not show 3 talents. It showed 4. I sat down hard on the bed. 4 meant unique. 4 meant the cheat draw the evaluation had bragged about. I forced my heart back into my chest and examined them in order, because the only thing worse than panicking would be picking the wrong one. The first talent was Brute Force, a white 6-star ability that increased strength by 600 pounds, described as an ordinary talent that would still give me a meaningful edge in the early stages. 600 pounds of strength, I muttered. That would flatten a sea beast in one swing. I tabled it as a strong fallback and kept reading. The second was Forager, green 1 star, granting a 10% chance to double the harvest when foraging, with an evaluation about how foragers were superior souls, or some such poetic nonsense. Green outranked white on the ladder, so it had star quality, but the effect was a 10% roll on items I would still have to find by hand. Brute Force was the safer floor, and I shelved Forager. The third was Fisherman, white 9 star, the highest star rating on the white tier, granting me a summonable talent fishing rod, and at least 1 guaranteed catch per day, with the evaluation joking that a fisherman never came home empty, even if what he caught was a sea beast plump enough to eat him back. I appreciated the joke and the floor of 1 fish a day, but I was still circling around the 4th slot. The 4th talent was the one I had been holding my breath for, the unique pull, the cheat draw, Gift of Fate. The panel listed it as a talent of unknown rating, usable once per day, with the appraisal that it delivered a gift from fate on each activation, which might come free, or might require me to pay a small price. And the additional note that the talent was so new the system could not rate it, that it was uniquely mine, and that the system highly recommended I take it. I rolled the name around in my head. Gift of Fate. Once a day. A gift. Maybe free. Maybe with a price tag. The unknown rating could mean garbage, or it could mean off the chart, and the highly recommended line was the system's own voice telling me what it thought. I confirmed Gift of Fate and watched it dissolve into a ray of light and slide into my body. The instant it took hold, I knew exactly how to activate it. I also knew I was not going to test it yet, because if there was going to be a price attached, I wanted something in my pockets first. And right now my pockets were a thin gray linen shirt and the unsettling realization that nobody had thought to give me underwear. 2 new chimes rang in my head. The system informed me Tidal Island had finished transforming, and the lighthouse had finished improving. I turned my head, and sure enough, a new staircase had appeared in the corner of the room. Narrow enough for one person, climbing up to a second floor I had not had a minute ago. I took it. The second floor of the lighthouse was little more than a half-meter walkway around a brazier, and the brazier carried a small white flame that looked, from a normal distance, like any other fire I had ever seen. White candlelight. There was no glass around the brazier, no shield against the wind, which struck me as a serious oversight from the system's interior designer. If the sea wind got serious, this flame had no business staying lit, and I made a note to figure out how to upgrade the lighthouse before I learned the answer to that question the hard way. I turned my eyes outward. The sea was vast and unbroken in every direction, a flat gray skin of water under a thick white fog that did not lift even in daylight. From up here I could see the whole shape of my island, the lighthouse planted dead in its middle. The 3,000 square meters the panel had quoted me did not all show above water, with a significant slice still submerged, which made it look smaller than its number. To the left of the lighthouse, a patch of forest, dozens of skinny trees standing barely 2 meters tall. None of them were coconut trees. So much for a fallback plan. The chime rang again as I came back down the stairs, and the projection in front of me told me the tide would begin to recede in half an hour, and that I should ready myself to search for resources. I glanced out the windows, and the seawater along the coastline had already started pulling back a few meters, beginning to reveal beach and rock that had been underwater seconds before. Not in a rush, I went over to the bed and opened the panels again. Personal attribute panel, lighthouse panel, island panel, inventory, chat channel. Lighthouse and island had updated to match my new pools. The inventory was the one tab I had not opened yet, and when I tapped it, 10 grid squares unfolded across the screen, with a small wrapped gift sitting alone in the first slot. The Novice Gift Pack. Special item, no rating, effect. On use, randomly grant a novice weapon, 2 black bread, and a 500 milliliter bottle of purified water. Generous of the system, I admitted, and used it. A great iron hammer slammed into my inventory, along with the bread and water it had promised. I pulled the hammer into my hand, and my forearm dropped 6 inches before I caught myself, the head almost clipping my foot. The thing was about 1¼ meters long and heavy as a small adult. Its panel called it a great iron hammer, white 1-star weapon, no effect. Evaluation that it was a perfectly respectable opener, heavy enough to do real work, common in any blacksmith shop, requiring no proficiency, just raw strength. Brute force and a hammer, I muttered, and decided that for a starting weapon I could do far worse. I glanced out the window. The tide was already down by 1/3. I opened the regional chat channel one more time, because if anyone was going to be showing off a special island or a unique talent, it would be in the noise of the opening hours, and I wanted to know what the field looked like. Bullet comments scrolled by, slower than before. I scanned the rules and noticed each player had 30 free posts a day, with anything beyond that costing a fee. People were squeaking at each other out of pure boredom, half of them in disbelief that nobody in the channel was still trying to claim this was a dream. The other half grumbling about the houses they had just mortgaged that no longer mattered. Then someone asked why nobody was bragging about their island, and the answer was that nearly everyone had drawn ordinary, with one passing mention that the speaker's broken arm had healed clean during the transition. That cracked the dam. The chat flooded with people reporting old injuries gone, healed legs, repaired joints, eyes that worked again. Someone asked about children and the elderly. The channel went silent. When the silence broke, the answer that came back was that the very young and the very old had been put into stasis, time frozen. 3 months of safety, with the rest of the sentence left politely unsaid. I read it once and did not need it spelled out, and the channel did not stay heavy long, because someone with a special island broke in to shift the topic. From there it ran the way these chats always did, a string of brags about rare lighthouses with arrow towers, a few weapon flexes, scattered mentions of talents at this or that rating. The thread closed itself when someone reminded everyone the tide was nearly out, that beachcombing was safe as long as nobody touched a deep-sea treasure chest, and that basic resources were waiting for the people who actually walked outside. I closed the projection, put the half-eaten bread, the whole bread, and the water onto the table to free up inventory slots, took my great iron hammer, and went out. The lighthouse was small enough that I doubted it could be stolen from given the population of 0. The door whined open like it was personally offended I was using it, and I kicked it shut behind me and headed for the beach. 3,000 square meters was nothing, and in a couple of minutes I was standing at the junction where the reef field met the open beach. I started there and worked my way around in a slow circle, because there was no point missing anything on the first pass. The beach was scattered with driftwood and stones, both sized and shaped exactly like the basic resources the system promised. I picked up a piece, and a panel told me it was wood, no rating, the main material for upgrading the lighthouse in the early stages. Useful for plenty more besides. The stones came up the same way. I went down the beach picking up everything I could carry, keeping one eye on the reef in case Tidal Island's reputation for attracting sea creatures decided to introduce itself. It did not. By the time I reached the far junction, my back was aching and my inventory was holding 43 pieces of wood and 24 stones, and I had not seen so much as a shell. Newbie period protection at work, probably. I straightened up, rubbed at my spine, and turned to face the reef. The The beach and the reef were a clean half-and-half split of my coastline, but the reef was where the worthwhile finds were going to be hiding. Anything dragged up by the tide would catch in the rocks instead of being washed back out, and that was where the system would have hidden the good loot. It was also where any sea beast that wanted to ambush me would be hiding. I rolled my shoulders, gripped the hammer, and stepped in. Picking through the reef was slower work than the beach. I found pieces of wood wedged between the stones, almost no loose rock, and I never did figure out where the stones on the beach had been washed up from. I kept moving, and then I saw it. A black deep-sea treasure chest, jammed between two reefs out ahead of me, sitting unguarded. Deep-sea treasure chests came with guardian sea beasts. My chat channel education had said so, but I scanned the reefs around the chest and saw nothing. No crab, no snake, no shadow under the water. I checked the panel for the day's weather and the line about a rare effect. The very small chance of a special treasure chest appearing in the wake of the tide. And the pieces clicked. A special chest. That was why it had no guardian. I gripped the hammer just in case and walked over slow, but the closer I got, the more convinced I was that there was nothing here to fight. Working the chest free from the reefs took me a solid 10 minutes of shoving it back and forth, but eventually it came loose, and I lifted it. The thing was barely bigger than a suitcase. Its panel called it a deep-sea treasure chest, category special, rated yellow 9-star, which the parenthetical informed me sat above blue, which sat above green, which sat above white on the ladder. Evaluation: a rare special chest, almost always recovered from the deep ocean floor or wrecked ships, almost never washed ashore. I grinned with all my teeth, dropped it into the inventory and kept walking, because I was not opening this until I was back in the lighthouse and the rest of the reef was searched. A few minutes later I found a wooden box, the regular kind, not a chest. Inside it were 2 fruits the size of apples. The panel labeled them water apple, food, white 1 star, no effect. An ordinary fruit common across most islands, juicy but not very filling. Food and water in one. I pocketed them and considered breaking the box down into the 2 pieces of wood the panel offered, but a box was useful as a box, so I kept it whole. A little after that, I came on a sea fish trapped alive in a pool the tide had left behind in a low spot of the reef. 3 or 4 pounds, easy, and that was a whole day's calories at the level I was working with. I drew the great iron hammer up and brought it down hard, and after a couple of brief thrashes the fish stopped moving. I was not being cruel for sport. I had no idea whether a fish in this world carried venomous spines, and I was not interested in finding out the wrong way. The panel called it a speckled sea fish. Food, white 1 star, common in reef areas after the tide. Sweet flesh and not toxic. I dropped it into the inventory and kept moving. Then I heard it, a long hissing sound that froze the muscles in my back. It came again, and I tracked it to a massive reef just ahead of me, and I tightened my grip on the hammer and crept around the side to see what I was about to fight. It was a 1-meter giant crab the color of wet stone, its jointed legs scraping against each other every time it moved, which turned out to be the source of the hissing, and there was a wooden chest sitting in the sand near it, which made the crab a guardian sea beast by definition. I caught myself wondering how it would taste, the way I always did with crab. I looked at the crab, then at the great iron hammer, and admitted the universe had a sense of humor, because I could not have asked for a better matchup. Hammers ate crab shell for breakfast. I was still weighing whether to swing first, when a deep voice rolled across the entire sky like an announcement, telling everyone that Tower Guardian Huang Xin had killed the first sea beast in the region, and earned the first kill reward, a bronze treasure chest, a random ability crystal, and a random blueprint. The announcement repeated twice more, which I gathered was tradition. I looked at the crab, and the crab did not look back at me, because crabs cannot easily look behind themselves, and theirs is one of the slowest turning radii in the animal kingdom. I crept around the side while the crab kept its attention pinned on the chest, planted my feet behind it, raised the hammer over my head, and brought it down. The shock that ran up my arms told me the shell was harder than I had wanted it to be, and for a panicked second, I thought I had wasted the surprise. Then I realized the crab could not pivot. The reef pit it was sitting in was too narrow to let it spin. I steadied myself, raised the hammer, and brought it down again. I kept count in my head, shouting numbers at myself to keep the rhythm. After more than 10 blows, the giant crab went still. A hammer-shaped hole punched through its back. I dropped onto my heels, hands trembling, breath ragged, and stared at the corpse. The sky spoke again. The system announced that Tower Guardian Im San had earned the second kill of the region, which came with a black iron treasure chest, a random ability crystal, and a random blueprint. The chest was a step down from first place, but the other rewards matched, and I was going to take a second place spread without complaint. The system asked if I wanted to claim my reward right then. I told it I would claim it back at the lighthouse, and it accepted that. I washed the hammer off in the seawater, packed it away, and took stock of the crab. Patted its back shell out of habit, the way you do when you have just beaten something larger than yourself, and then folded the body into the inventory. No disassemble prompt the way there had been for the wooden box. The panel finally let me read its data, naming it a shallow sea crab, strength ordinary, no talent, no ability, the description noting bluntly that this was the corpse of an immature shallow sea crab, in that I had been able to kill it as easily as I had, because the reef had trapped it from turning. Immature. If this thing was a juvenile, the adult of the species was going to be taller than me. I hoped its parents were not the sort to come asking after their kids, because the lighthouse would not survive 2 of those claws. The wooden chest came next, sitting where the crab had been guarding it. The panel called it a wooden treasure chest, ordinary chest, rated white 3-star, no effect. Evaluation that it was the lowest grade of chest with a cap at white 3-star and that I was apparently very lucky. I laughed at that and packed it away. I worked the rest of the reef on the way back, finding 2 more wooden boxes with 2 more water apples each, which brought my apple count to 6, a small pile of wood, and no stones at all. Then the sound of waves carrying up the slope, the seawater visibly creeping back inland. I opened the panel and checked the clock, which read 12:30 in the afternoon, against the 6 in the morning I had clocked before leaving. 6 hours had passed, not 3, which checked out, because Tidal Island doubled the low tide window, and I turned for the lighthouse. My inventory rolled out as I walked. The great iron hammer, 75 pieces of wood, 24 stones, the deep sea treasure chest, 6 water apples, the wooden box, the speckled sea fish, the wooden treasure chest, the shallow sea crab corpse, 9 of 10 slots filled. A fruitful morning, I muttered, and wondered idly what everyone else had pulled in. Back inside the lighthouse, I laid out the 2 chests on the floor, and the water apples and the wooden box on the table, and tapped the system to claim my second-place reward. The black iron treasure chest, the random ability crystal, and the random blueprint dropped into my inventory all at once. I noticed there had been no third-place announcement yet. Probably the tide had come back in before anyone else could finish their kill. I would worry about that later. I pulled out the rewards one at a time. The black iron treasure chest, rated green 3-star, common treasure chest, with a stated 10% chance of a rare item inside, evaluation calling it the brave took the second step reward. The fact that a chest had an effect at all caught me off guard, and so did the green 3-star rating. Since I had been bracing for something in the white 4-star range, I shelved it. Random ability crystal, blue 9-star. Special item. On use grants a random ability between green 9-star and yellow 1-star. Evaluation calling it one of the few ways to acquire an extraordinary ability. If brute force at white 6-star could grant 600 pounds of strength, a green 9-star ability could move worlds. Random blueprint, blue 1-star, on use grants a random blueprint between green 1-star and blue 3-star. Evaluation calling it one of the easiest ways to acquire a rare blueprint. Both rewards were in the rare item tier, so the top 3 placement carried real weight. I turned to the chests, starting with the wooden treasure chest, and the system reported its contents as 13 pieces of wood, 3 black bread, and 2 500-milliliter bottles of purified water. My mouth twitched at that. A white 3-star chest delivering exactly the kind of yield it advertised. If a white 1-star chest was even worse, it was going to be a miserly handful of wood and a single piece of bread. I made a mental note to compare on the chat channel later, since with 100,000 players in the region, someone was bound to have data. The black iron treasure chest next. The system rolled out 3 items, a pair of black scale pants, a black iron spear, and 1 piece of exquisite bread. The black scale pants were equipment, green 3-star, no effect. Evaluation that they were forged from the scales of a black scale sea beast, and would shrug off the claws of an immature shallow sea crab, provided my legs were tough enough to take the impact through them. I looked at the shallow sea crab's pincers in my inventory, imagined them on my leg, and pulled the pants on right there. The system did not include a one-click equip, but the moment the pants were on, they shrank to fit. The black iron spear was weapon, green 1-star, no effect. Evaluation that it was the issued weapon of the guards of Blackrock Town. Average sharpness, above average durability, more than enough to put down ordinary sea beasts. I pulled it into my hand and immediately regretted it, because 2 meters of black iron came in at 30 pounds of weight or more, heavier than my hammer. The hammer I could swing one-handed if I had to. The spear was going to need both. I tucked it away and decided to practice with it later. The exquisite bread was just well-made bread. I would find out at the next meal how it tasted. That left the deep sea treasure chest. Yellow 9-star with no listed effect, but the rating alone said it was the best chest I owned. Even the system's top 3 random reward chests had not come in this high. I rubbed my hands together and announced to the empty lighthouse that I was willing to trade a year of my life off every other tower guardian in exchange for a fat haul, then cracked it open. 4 items dropped in, and only the first sounded promising by name. A deep sea mermaid pearl, a soaked box, a piece of sullen soil, and a piece of decayed wood. I started with the pearl. Special item, purple 1-star, which sat 1 tier above yellow on a ladder. Effect, underwater breathing and water-based extraordinary attribute +10. Special effect, easily attracts the attention of merfolk. Evaluation, a mermaid pearl could only be acquired when a mermaid died or willingly surrendered it, and since mermaids almost never surrendered theirs willingly, possession of one in most cases marked the owner as an enemy of the entire merfolk race. The hint at the bottom noted that the pearl required a drop of blood to bind to me. A purple 1-star item out of a yellow 9-star chest. The water-based extraordinary attribute promised some kind of water energy I did not yet understand, and underwater breathing alone was worth offending an entire underwater civilization for. since I was on an island and the sea was right there. If I lived long enough to meet a merfolk, I would worry about it then. I picked up the black iron spear, drew its tip across my forearm, and let blood bead up. I pressed the pearl to the cut, and the blood vanished into it on contact, and the pearl settled into a quiet hum at the back of my mind, suddenly tethered to me. A second thought told me I could absorb it into my body, and I tried it. The pearl dissolved into me, and the sensation passed without fanfare. I stood there a moment, expecting fireworks. Got none, and shrugged. The soaked box came next. Miscellaneous. White 1 star, no effect. Description that it had been underwater for a long time and that no one knew what was inside. I lifted it out of the inventory and it hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud that told me whatever was in it was metal. There was a rusted lock on the front and the box itself was rusted half to pieces. I picked up the great iron hammer, gave the lock one light tap, and the rust did the rest of the work. The lid groaned open. I let out a string of stunned exclamations that the system was not paid to record, because the box was full to the brim with gold coins, every single one glittering enough to hurt my eyes. I picked one up and found a lighthouse stamped on one face and a script I could not read on the other, and the panel called it Currency, Blue 1 star, hard currency of the lighthouse world, usable for purchasing goods for maritime merchants. Blue 1 star for a single coin. I let out a low whistle and scooped them into my inventory in double handfuls, the jingling pleasant enough that I caught myself smiling. By the time the box was empty, the count was 13,285 coins. I dumped them right back into the box, which was the only sensible storage for that much weight, and walked the box over to the corner by my bed. Coins this size, in this volume, had to weigh several hundred pounds. Easy, and that was not something I wanted clattering around in an inventory slot. Unlike the wooden treasure chest, the soaked box did not vanish after I emptied it. It could be disassembled, the panel told me. It could also be kept. I kept it. Even the trash items in a yellow 9-star chest were not really trash, I admitted, and turned to the last two. The sullen soil was material, green 3-star, effect rich in nutrients, description that it was a soil commonly found deep beneath the sea, rich enough in nutrients to be a good choice for a planting pot. About 15 pounds of it. I dropped it straight into the wooden box that had held the water apples, and it sat in there like the pot had been waiting for it. A planting pot. Ready to go, if I could ever lay hands on a seed. Whether water apples had seeds was a question for another time. The decayed wood was junk, no rating, no effect, just a piece of what looked like shipdeck plank washed up from a wreck. I threw it out the window. That cleared the items off the table. What remained was the main event, the random ability crystal, the random blueprint, and gift of fate. I weighed the order and decided to open the blueprint first, the crystal second, and burn my talent activation last, because the talent might require a price and I wanted to know what I had to spend. The random blueprint went first, and the system delivered me a toilet paper blueprint, green 1 star, with the effect that it allowed a crafting table to learn how to make toilet paper, and a description that finally no more using hands, branches, or leaves. I sat with that for a beat. A toilet paper blueprint of all the things, then conceded the market for it would in fact be enormous in a few weeks. The problem was that I did not own a crafting table to teach the recipe to, which made the blueprint dead weight until I solved that, and I set it aside and picked up the ability crystal. The system delivered me an Ice Crystal Shot Ability Crystal, blue 5 star, effect deals ice damage and slows targets, learning requirement at least 1 point of ice, or water-based extraordinary attributes. Description that extraordinary abilities of course required corresponding extraordinary attributes. If I had not bound the mermaid pearl 10 minutes ago, this crystal would have been a paperweight. As it stood, I had 10 points of water-based attribute waiting in me, and the requirement was 1. I used the crystal. It cracked apart, dissolved into powder, and the light shot into my forehead. The technique for ice crystal shot snapped into my mind in one piece, a brutally direct delivery I was not going to pretend I enjoyed. My forehead ached for a beat as the crystal finished spending itself, and that left only Gift of Fate sitting on the table waiting for me. I activated it. The panel that came up told me Gift of Fate had selected a red devil shrimp set meal as my offering, and the cost was any one seafood item. I did not have to think about it. The speckled sea fish was right there in my inventory. I confirmed the trade. The sea fish vanished, and a steaming plated dish appeared in front of me. A red devil shrimp the size of my forearm. 10 pounds easy, smelling like an island restaurant I would have queued an hour to eat at in my old life. The panel for the dish called it Delicacy, blue 1 star effect. After consumption gain 1 point of fire-based extraordinary attribute. Description, a delicacy cooked from rare red devil shrimp, large shrimp native to the Red Devil Sea, who live near underwater volcanoes. Naturally rich in strong fire-based attributes, and only cookable through specialized methods. A delicacy that gave me a stat point on consumption, traded 1 for 1 against a fish I had killed an hour ago. I almost laughed out loud. The cost to benefit on Gift of Fate had just paid back the price of the unknown rating. I shook off the urge to brag about the pearl and the kill and the deep-sea treasure chest in the same 5 minutes, on the grounds that nothing good ever came from rubbing it in to 100,000 strangers on day 1, and sat down to eat. I opened the chat channel as I ate, since the chat allowed photo sharing and I had at least decided to share the meal. Communication kept the loneliness off, and the days ahead were going to need that. The bullet comments rolled past as before, but the region's player count had ticked down to 99,673, a drop of 327 souls in a single morning. 300 dead before lunch, I muttered, and read the room. People were noticing the count. Someone admitted they had only just barely made it back from the beach, with a crab too big to fight head-on. Someone else asked how to upgrade their lighthouse, and a second person backed them up with the same question, and the consensus that rolled up was that maybe lighthouse upgrades were not unlocked yet. Someone confirmed the first-place killer's handle read as a woman's name, and the channel collectively decided gender was the least interesting question in the world right now. Someone bitterly reported their kill had been swept back into the sea by the incoming tide. The low tide window in their region was only 3 hours, and the reef was hard to walk. Someone else with a clean beach said their walk had been easy, but the haul had been 3 pieces of driftwood and 2 wooden treasure chests. Wooden treasure chests turned out to be the universal floor, although a few players had pulled heavy wooden treasure chests at white 5-star with prefixes attached, suggesting the wooden chest line had grades. Then someone in the channel posted a photo of mantis shrimp the size of a man's forearm, and the channel turned briefly into a seafood market until a baby's hunger plea made the regulars unkind. I scrolled past, picked up the trick that replies, pinned a comment to the top, and decided that was good, because anything useful in the noise would not get lost. Most people by the look of it had only pulled wooden treasure chests. The treasure chest line above wood was not black iron yet, but heavy wooden and exquisite wooden, capped at white 6-star and white 9-star respectively, covering the whole white 1 through 9-star bracket before the black iron line picked up. That answered a question I had been holding. I finished the red devil shrimp without noticing I had cleared the plate, leaving nothing but the hard shell, and a chime told me my fire-based extraordinary attribute was up by 1 point. I opened my personal attribute panel, and the system listed me now as Imsan, Strength over Mortal, Talent Gift of Fate, Abilities Ice Crystal Shot and Underwater Breathing, Extraordinary Attributes Water System +10, and Fire System +1, with the evaluation that I was a novice over mortal whose first extraordinary attribute had just hit 10 points. I stroked my chin. The jump from ordinary person to overmortal had happened on attributes alone. My body itself had not changed. I had just gained the ability to throw ice crystals and the ability to breathe underwater. 10 points of water-based attribute, 1 point firing 1 ice crystal shot, with the option of stacking points for a bigger shot at a higher cost. 10 shots a day if recovery was anything reasonable. Plenty for now. I closed the panel and took stock of the table. 3 whole black bread, 1 bread I had bitten in half, 1 open bottle of purified water, 2 unopened 500 milliliter bottles of purified water, 1 piece of exquisite bread, and 1 toilet paper blueprint. Most of it was food, mostly the kind that kept. The black bread looked solid for 3 or 4 days. The exquisite bread did not look like it would hold that long, and I marked it for tomorrow's breakfast. The rest of my haul I sorted in my head. The mermaid pearl was in my body. Nothing to do with it. The black scale pants were already on, although without underwear under them my backside was getting acquainted with the breeze. The black iron spear could fully replace the great iron hammer, being longer, heavier, and capable of stabbing where the hammer could only swing. The hammer had crushed a crab's shell on the strength of its weight, but the spear could do that and more if used properly. The lighthouse gold coins were sitting in their box collecting dust. Useless until I met a maritime merchant. The sullen soils sat ready in the wooden box, a planting pot without a seed. 6 water apples sat on the table, of unknown shelf life. The shallow sea crab was still in my inventory, and the inventory, I had discovered when I pulled the fish out, did not preserve freshness, only slowed spoilage. A dead crab that was not eaten within the day was going to turn. That decided dinner. A crab feast tonight. I tidied the backpack, and after putting the room-bound items on shelves, 6 of the 10 slots came up empty, with the wood, the stones, the spear, and the crab as the running stock. I clapped my hands and decided it was time to take the new ability out for a test run. The door whined open the same way it had whined shut. The sun was high enough that the sea mist thinned a little, and I crossed the few dozen meters from the lighthouse to the patch of forest at a slow walk. Tidal Island, outside of these dozen-odd skinny trees, had nothing else to use as a target. Big stones did not exist on the island. Practicing against the lighthouse itself was out of the question. The trees it was. I told the trees up front that I would not cut them down unless I absolutely had to. They did not answer. I raised my palm and called the technique. Ice crystal shot as the technique had drilled into my mind, condensed an ice crystal in front of my palm, and then launched it at a target, dealing ice damage, slowing the target, and piercing on impact. I followed the instructions. A cool sensation traveled from my chest down my arm to my hand, and a slender ice crystal grew out of the air about 10 centimeters above my palm, and hung there, rotating slightly perfectly under my control. My first extraordinary ability. I took a moment longer than I needed just to look at the thing, then started counting backward, because I had questions and a finite store of points. I waited, and 2 minutes passed before the crystal began to dissipate, which meant 1 point of water-based extraordinary attribute bought me a 2-minute hover. Next, range. I condensed a fresh crystal and launched it out over the sea, and it traveled fast, very fast, but after roughly 100 meters the crystal began to fall apart in the air. I felt the connection thinning out past 10 meters and snap clean past 100, which meant the crystal needed me to feed it extraordinary energy at distance, and beyond the 100-meter line that energy could no longer reach. I made a note that no shots could go past 100 meters at this tier. Speed I measured by the clock, 200 meters per second give or take, fast enough that a normal person would not be defending against it. That left the question of damage, and I looked at the nearest tree, which had no opinion on being a target. I launched, and the crystal flew past it, grazed the bark and buried itself half deep into the ground at the base of the trunk, where it detonated. A pale cloud of ice mist bloomed outward, and the dirt within a meter of the impact crusted over with a thin sheet of ice. I sucked in a breath. The yield was bigger than I had expected. If that was the damage on dirt, a shallow sea crab was not going to like a clean hit. I pulled the crab corpse out of the inventory, set it on the ground, and used the spear to pry the claws and the legs off the body, leaving the central shell intact as my test subject. I backed up 3 meters, condensed another crystal, and threw it. At 3 meters there was no missing. The crystal punched through the shell and detonated, and the whole surface of the crab body iced over in an eye blink. I leaned close and pulled back, my own breath fogging, then tapped the shell with the butt of the spear, and the shell shattered. A second tap collapsed the entire body into a small pile of ice shards, frozen all the way through. If I had left the claws and legs attached, they would have shattered with it, and I would have lost dinner, and the power was bigger than the system's clip description had implied. I went back to practicing, and within an hour my 10 points of water-based extraordinary attribute were spent, confirming that extraordinary attribute and extraordinary energy were the same thing under 2 names. I picked up a few dead branches and a handful of leaves on the way back to the lighthouse, because the claws and the legs were going to need cooking later, and inside I opened the chat channel and let it run. The chat had moved on. A long stretch of players asking how to upgrade the lighthouse and the sealand, with no answers, only the suggestion that upgrades were not unlocked yet, which fit the empty interior I was standing in. Another stretch about the sea, with one player warning everyone never to go in, because something in the water was worse than the things on the reef, and another player admitting he had been about to walk in because he had grown up by the sea and had not yet internalized that this was not Earth. A scattered thread asking whether the top 3 killers' ability crystals were different from their talents, with no one willing to commit an answer. Then someone complaining about a useless talent that produced 1 piece of black bread a day, immediately countered by another player calling guaranteed daily food anything but useless. The original poster admitting his other 2 talent roles had been worse. Then a player with green 1-star bragged that hers produced a random common food each day and pinned a photo of a cream bread, and the channel briefly went poetic about how a cream bread that none of them would have looked at before now read like a luxury food. The conversation skipped sideways into whether the world channel's tens of billions of people implied other planets and what aliens looked like, half of it joking, half of it not. Then a chime cut through, and a system prompt told us all the tide would begin to recede again in half an hour. The chat lit up with players announcing they were going for 3rd place. The announcement of the timing meant everyone now knew, and the curses that followed made it clear several players had been hoping to slip out without warning their competition. Someone observed that midday tides were not how Blue Star worked, and someone else countered that this was not Blue Star and the rules were different. Players began listing items for sale and items wanted. The push for the 3rd place reward, which would also drop a random ability crystal and a random blueprint, was on. I checked the time. A little past 3 in the afternoon, and my water-based extraordinary attribute had recovered by 2 points, which worked out to 1 point per hour. I muttered that this recovery rate was painfully slow, that there had to be a faster method I had not learned yet, but I let it go. 2 points was enough for 2 more shallow sea crabs, and that was the immediate ceiling on what I could fight. I went out to the reef. The reef field had been the better hunting ground last time, with the best find density of the whole coast, and that was where I started. The seawater pulled back as I walked, and a number of small fish were being dragged back out with it, and I let them go without trying to wade in after them. Even with underwater breathing, the sea was an unknown, and the shallow sea crab had taught me that anything underwater was probably bigger than what came up onto the reef. The same shallow sea crab that I had killed by trapping it in a pit would be on its home ground in the water, and I would be the meal. Not unless I saw a treasure chest being towed back out by the seawater. I walked the reef and found nothing for half its length. A dozen pieces of wood, no chests, not even a wooden treasure chest. I complained out loud that the system had promised double chest spawn rates during the newbie benefit period, and asked the empty air whether the doubling was being held against me by my own day. 1 luck on the deep sea chest. By the time I had finished the reef, the wood count in my inventory had climbed from the start of 88 to 134, 46 more pieces of wood. No chest. I sighed and turned for the beach, and the moment I stepped out of the reef field and onto the open sand, I stopped where I was, because a giant mantis shrimp was waiting for me on the other side of the chest it was circling. The mantis shrimp was over 1 meter long, glossy and segmented, and it was tracing a slow loop around a wooden treasure chest in the sand like a sentry on a beat. The second guardian sea beast of the day. I watched it for a long moment, calling up everything I knew about its kind. The mantis shrimp's speed was not the problem. but the mantis shrimp's two scything claws looked sharp enough to part flesh on contact, and any swipe that landed was going to open me from collarbone to hip. The giant mantis shrimp spotted me the instant I cleared the edge of the reef and dropped into a low fighting crouch, its front limbs cocked back and ready, the two scything claws held out like a pair of folded straight razors. I had not stepped into its 3-meter ring yet though, so as long as I held that line it stayed on guard rather than charging, the hard clack of its claws snapping against each other rolling across the sand in a steady warning rhythm. I thought back to every nature program I had ever half-watched on the giant mantis shrimp, and remembered those front limbs were among the fastest-moving appendages in the animal kingdom, which meant I had no confidence I could dodge the first strike and even less about the second, since there would not be one. But the giant mantis shrimp was guarding a treasure chest, and the treasure chest was the whole reason I was out here, so giving up on it was not on the table. I decided to work the rest of the beach first and circle back. If there was nothing useful on the strand, I would burn an ice crystal shot on the shrimp, but if I did that, the shrimp would freeze inedible, and crab and shrimp the size of a man's forearm were too expensive a dinner to throw away. I gave the giant mantis shrimp a wide arc and kept walking. The beach was the simplest terrain on the coast, the system's catalog covering reef, beach, gravel beach, mud flat, coral, and mangrove, and the beach was where the boring stones and wood lived while the reef carried the treasure. Pet theory anyway, since pet theories were what I had instead of intel. The rest of the beach gave me a few more pieces of wood, a small pile of stones, and no chests. By the time I worked my way back, the giant mantis shrimp was still tracing the same slow loop around the chest, and as soon as I came back into eyeshot, it clacked at me all over again. I waited out. The black iron spear in my hand was a hair over 2 meters. The giant mantis shrimp was 1.5 meters from tail tip to claw tip, and the math said I could plant the spearhead past its swing radius and keep it there. The catch was that the only data I had on the shrimp's foot speed was its loitering pace around the chest, and there was every chance it could blur across 3 meters faster than I could blink. The only way to find out was to push the line and see. I raised the black iron spear, set the tip dead center on the giant mantis shrimp, and walked it forward, the clacking ratcheting up the closer I got. The instant I crossed into the 3-meter ring, the shrimp launched at me in a clean low charge, and the black iron spear punched right through it. Heart, lungs, whatever a giant mantis shrimp had in the middle, the spearhead carved a tunnel through the body and the shrimp's own forward momentum drove it onto the shaft. I stood there with 30 pounds of black iron and 1.5 meters of impaled shellfish on the end of it, looking a little stupid. Good heavens, I thought. It just ran straight into the point. My mouth twitched. I let go of the haft, and the shrimp went down on the sand, thrashing under the weight of the spear, pinning it to the ground. After a few seconds of seizing convulsions, the giant mantis shrimp gave up the ghost. I packed the shrimp into the inventory, wiped the spear, packed the spear, and walked to the chest, muttering that there was absolutely no sense of accomplishment in any of this. Across the region, 100,000 people were knife-fighting their own sea beasts for the third-place reward, and if they could have heard me complaining, they would have cursed me out of orbit. Not every player even had a sea beast on the beat today, and the third-place announcement had not gone out yet, which meant the race was still open. The chest had a prefix on the front of the name, and the panel called it Sea Salt Wooden Treasure Chest. Normal treasure chest. White 5-star, special effect, a guaranteed drop of sea salt. Evaluation, a wooden treasure chest containing sea salt. So a prefix bumped a wooden treasure chest above the standard white 3-star ceiling, which meant the chat channel mentions of heavy wooden treasure chests and exquisite wooden treasure chests had been upper grades of the same line. Prefix tagged. I packed the chest in and looked around the empty beach, asking out loud what I was supposed to do with the rest of low tide, since I had no clue how to upgrade either the lighthouse or the sealand and the beach was tapped. For a couple of seconds, I stared at the deep blue water past the reef and entertained the idea of wading in, since the sea had to be a treasure trove compared to a few stones on the sand. Then I reminded myself this was day one in a world where the chat channel's body count had already climbed into the hundreds before lunch, and I shook the impulse off without committing to it. Not yet, not until I knew more about what lived in the water. I checked the time on the way back, 5:30 in the afternoon, with the light already starting to slant, and it struck me as strange that the third-place announcement still had not fired. The system answered before I could finish the thought, congratulating Tower Guardian Jin Geolim for being the third in the region to put down a sea beast and claim the wooden treasure chest, the random ability crystal, and the random blueprint, the announcement running twice more out of tradition. I imagined the regional channel exploding into curses, anyone who had been half a swing away from their own kill having just lost the spread, some of them wearing fresh wounds for the trouble. I muttered that I had just mentioned the rivals and one of them had walked right in. I was curious which ability the third-place crystal would gift Jin Geolim, but without an extraordinary attribute to anchor it, the thing would sit on the table as a paperweight. Same as mine would have if the mermaid pearl had not given me a water-based extraordinary attribute to feed the ice crystal shot. A handful of players in the region had extraordinary attributes from their starter talent rolls, since the white 4-star talents granted 4 points of extraordinary attribute. But a stat without a matching ability was just hardware without software, and those players had already complained themselves hoarse in the chat earlier. By the time I got the lighthouse door to whine open, the regional channel was wailing into the void about the lost spread, and the population counter had ticked down another 100+ souls since I last looked. I frowned at it and let the room have the silence. There was still a sea salt wooden treasure chest to open, and in this place the chest opening was my only theater. The sea salt wooden treasure chest cracked open with a soft splinter, and the system reported 500 grams of sea salt and 1 dim low-grade energy stone. Only 2 items, which made me grumble that the giant mantis shrimp killing itself on my spear had clearly counted against the drop quota, even though I knew that was nonsense. The sea salts panel called it plain sea salt, no rating worth noting. A baseline survival need any way you cut it, and between the water apples in the wooden box and the salt the pantry was filling out, the dim low-grade energy stone was the real find. Listed as an energy stone at white 9-star, effect replenishes energy, the description calling it a low-grade stone that had already burned through half its charge. One of the substances used to top off a lighthouse's reserves, and also usable to recover extraordinary attribute energy. The final line stated flatly that energy was the hardest currency of the entire Sealand world, which I sat with for a beat. I lifted the stone out of the inventory and turned it in my hand, and sure enough the surface was webbed with fine cracks the way an overworked battery looks before the case ruptures. The stone was on its last legs, and once the remaining charge ran out it would shatter into nothing. I had no idea yet how to actually absorb its charge into anything, and the system had not bothered to write the manual, so I muttered that the lighthouse survival system was thoroughly perfunctory about its own basics, and dropped the stone back in storage. I gathered a handful of dry leaves and branches from the forest, built a small ring of stones outside the lighthouse, took a dry branch up to the second floor and dipped it in the white candlelight until it caught, and brought the flame back down. The kindling lit on the first try, and once the pit was crackling steadily, I laid out the shallow sea crab's 8 legs and 2 great claws, in a careful row. 8 pieces and 2 claws were going to be hard to finish solo, and with no refrigerator and no preservation rig, the inventory only slowed spoilage instead of stopping it. So I roasted everything and decided to put the surplus on the chat channel for trade. I opened the channel as the crab legs were turning, snapped a photo of the spread, and offered giant crab legs and claws at 10 wood, or stone for a leg and 20 for a claw. First come, first served. The channel detonated into the usual chorus, with someone shouting about cooked food, someone else cooing at the second-ranked big shot and asking if I was accepting sidekicks, and a third player naming the species as shallow sea crab on sight, going on to explain how a non-big shot would know that they had led a juvenile shallow sea crab around their reef until it foamed at the mouth, and only then beaten it to death. By the time I finished bagging the meat, the legs were sold out and the claws were sold out, and a fresh round of complaints had started about how the latecomers had been left nothing. My inventory was up 60 wood and 30 stone for a couple minutes of shouting at a panel. 274 wood and 142 stone on the running ledger. I sat down with 1 leg and 1 claw set aside for me, gnawed on the leg by the table while the mist rolled in off the sea, and watched the sun lose its color. By 6:30 I had half an hour to nightfall, and the mist was climbing the slope toward the island faster than I would have liked. I gathered the cooked meat off the ground outside, threw the legs and claws into the room, and pulled the door shut behind me, because a warped door with a draft was still better than an open one. At 7 on the dot, the sun cut out as if a switch had been thrown, the world going to full black in the space of a heartbeat. In the next instant, the brazier on the second floor came alive and flooded the room with the soft wash of the white candlelight. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, because the full black had been more pressure than I wanted to admit. Fear of the dark was older than language, and Lighthouse Survival had built its rules on top of that fear with surgical precision. I climbed the stairs and found the white candlelight had grown to fill the entire brazier, a meter-wide white flame no normal wind should have been able to put out. Although the absence of any glass shield around it remained a problem I was going to have words about with the system designer later. Outside the walkway, the mist was already on top of us, a thick wall of white swallowing the world a few feet past the railing. And the 3-meter radius the white candlelight pushed back on the mist made the lighthouse a small bubble of clear air in a sea of gray. I came back down to find the bonfire outside wreathed in mist, the firelight in the pit only making the surrounding white glow faintly, and I was about to turn back to the table when a black shape flickered across my field of view, past the door window, and the fire in the pit went out, as if someone had blown across it. I grabbed the black iron spear, and my body went tight all over, eyes locked on the door, because the bonfire had been 2 meters past the threshold, and the mist was pressing within a meter of the threshold itself. Whatever had killed the fire had been close enough to walk through both and not show up on the clear side. I stood there sweating into my palms with my eyes locked on the warped wooden door for a full 10 minutes before I dared lower my guard. Nothing came at the door. No impact, no claw, no breath, so I let out a long, ragged exhale and slowly put the spear away, muttering that I needed to find an item that granted immunity to whatever the hell that had been. I crossed to the window, slid it shut, and only then felt the room come back to something like ease before I opened the chat channel. The whole region was screaming, players posting frantic pictures of monsters at their doors, confirming that the dangerous mist was, surprise of surprises, dangerous. A handful of players had not made it back to their lighthouses in time, fishing or scavenging on muddy beach terrains that had slowed them down, and the channel was passing around the names of the ones whose handles had turned dim. One reader kept asking why nobody had run back when they saw the mist gather, and the answer was always the same, that a mud-flat coastline had killed their footspeed, and they had been caught in the open with nothing more to say about it. Then someone called the things at the door demons rather than beasts, and posted a picture of the Channel 8 hole, an image taken from the second floor of a lighthouse looking down on a four-limbed merman, a little over a meter tall, bristly and ugly, hammering at the panels with a long-fingered fist. The next photo, posted by a player who had already won the encounter, showed the same merman dead with a wooden treasure chest sitting beside it, and the poster explained the trick, that the holes in the dilapidated wooden doors were big enough to thread a weapon through, and a clean stab to the head finished a merman in one go. The thread broke into a giddy weapon parade, a long row of players sharpening their gear to receive their own door visitor. I closed the chat with a small smile, because I had a 2-meter black iron spear and a wooden door full of holes the right size to thread a spearhead through, and I was looking forward to my own merman. While I waited, I thought back to the shape that had killed the bonfire, which had not been a merman, the size was wrong, and the shape had been bigger and faster and completely silent. There were other things in this mist than the doormat the chat channel was busy poking at. My stomach growled, reminding me I had forgotten dinner in the chest-opening frenzy, and I picked up the legs and claws off the floor still warm, the meat inside warmer. Looking at the spread of 8 legs and 2 great claws, I admitted with my hand on my chest that even on a hungry day I could not put away more than 1 claw on my own, let alone the whole haul. So I kept 1 claw and 1 leg back, photographed the rest, and put them up for sale on the channel at the same 10 and 20 rate as before. Something hit the door hard enough to almost shake the crab leg out of my hand, and the second and third impacts rolled in right behind the first, the rhythm of a fist pounding on warped wood. I dropped the leg and grabbed the black iron spear, finally about to get my turn at a merman. The chat channel had been clear that the doors of these starter lighthouses were tougher than they looked, that a merman could spend 10 minutes pounding the panels and only burn a single % of lighthouse energy, and since nobody yet knew how to refill that energy, every % was a fortress wall worth defending. The standing wisdom of the channel was to kill on contact, as soon as a merman appeared. The trick, as a particular big shot had laid it out in detail, was to read the door holes for the merman's silhouette and put a clean weapon tip through the eye. The same big shot, since I was being honest with myself, was the Huang Xin who held first place in the region and was currently posting medical diagrams of the merman she had killed, dragging each corpse in after the kill and dissecting it for the public benefit. The dissection photos had given the chat channel a low-grade case of the cold sweats, especially the male players who resented losing first place to a woman, and now found themselves staring at the same woman's labeled illustrations of merman muscle groups and tooth structure, trembling with lingering fear in the proverbial phrase. I had scrolled through every photo, and Huang Xin's annotations were so clear, anyone not trying to fail could pull the merman's weak points out of the captions inside 2 minutes. The biology was simple. The merman's leg muscles were not built for speed on land. Their grip strength was nothing special, and their only real weapon was a mouthful of sharp pointed teeth that would take a chunk of flesh out of you on contact. On land, with even a basic weapon, they were a free win, and with Huang Xin's notes in pocket, even a player meeting one for the first time had a strong chance at the kill. I admired Huang Xin the way a slacker admires a top student, since there was nothing else for it. My own school had been the kind where the math teacher was the gym teacher in the wrong period, a man closer to 6 feet tall who would mumble through 10 minutes of arithmetic and then quietly convert the rest of the hour into an extra physical education class. The fact that I was alive and the same school had produced anyone capable of reading a panel was a small miracle. I shook the digression out of my head and stepped to the door. I was about to plant my eye against the upper door hole to line up the spear when something already on the other side moved into the same hole. A single blood-red eye. I almost dropped the spear, because the eye was not in the lower hole where a merman's eye should have been, but in the upper, which meant whatever was on the other side of my door was at least 2 meters tall. I tightened my grip on the black iron spear and reached for an ice crystal shot as a backup, the cool sensation tracking down my arm into my palm. The eye stared at me with malice rolling off of it in waves, and I cursed under my breath and asked the door what the hell I was looking at, because nothing in Huang Xin's photographs had ever come close to looking like this. The eye did not move, did not blink, only stared at me from the upper hole. Then it was closer and I realized the eye had not moved. I had, my feet taking a step toward the door without checking with me first. I tried to look away and my neck would not turn. I tried to step back and my legs would not obey. I had no idea that on my side of the door, my own eyes were slowly turning the same blood-red color as the eye on the other side, that the mental control was meeting me halfway and making a mirror of my face. All I knew was that something in the eye on the other side was reeling me in. The tip of the black iron spear, 2 meters of weight and length, hit the door first and planted against the wood like a brace, and my next step pressed the spear against my own torso, the resistance holding me up like a leash. I let out a breath I did not deserve, grateful for 30 pounds of black iron and the muscle memory to have gripped the shaft early. My body was being walked, but my mind was still mine, at least for now. I worked the problem the only way I could. If the control passed through eye contact, then breaking eye contact had to break the control. The system panel was a projection I could open in front of my face. If I could throw the panel up in the way, I could blind the connection and shake free. I reached for the panel. The system pinged, detected the Tower Guardian under mental control, refused the request, with a polite parenthetical that the restriction existed to keep mental control abilities from being used by Tower Guardians to manipulate other Tower Guardians for profit. I cursed the system out under my breath, asking who in their right mind had decided that a monster's mental control counted the same as a player's, while my body was being walked to its death by a single eye and a door. My hands were already losing grip strength. My feet were still pressing me into the spear. The shaft was bending against my chest. Another minute and my fingers would unlock and the door would swing open under their own weight. The system pinged again, asking whether I wanted to view an incoming private message, and I almost wept at the offer. A private message would open its own panel, a panel the system was apparently willing to throw up for me even under mental control. I shouted yes inside my head as hard as I have ever shouted anything. The panel opened in front of my eyes and slammed across the door hole like a curtain. I went down in a heap. My limbs unlocked at once. My knees hit the boards. My breath came back in a single ragged shove, and I sat there on the floor of the lighthouse staring at the chat panel until the dark stopped pulsing at the edge of my sight. Whoever had sent the message, whoever the saint with the private chat had been, I owed them. Then I read the message. 1 + 1 = what? I read it again. 1 + 1 = what? The saint of the moment was a stranger using a private chat to ask me a kindergarten arithmetic question. I sat with that for a second. Then I started to laugh, because it did not matter why. A panel had popped up in my face exactly when I needed a panel to pop up in my face, and asking why was a luxury for a survivor. I steadied myself, condensed an ice crystal shot in my palm, and aimed it at the blood-red eye where it should have been on the other side of the door, lining up by the muscle memory of the last 5 minutes of being stared at. I let it go. The ice crystal shot punched through the upper door hole, detonated, and the entire wooden door iced over in a flash. A long choked roar bled through from the other side, the kind of sound a wounded thing makes when it is still big enough to be dangerous and small enough to know it has been hurt. I sagged back against the wall. When I dared look at the door hole again, the hole was dark. No eye, no movement. I muttered out loud that whatever item granted immunity to mental control in this game, I was going to own it before the week was out. The lighthouse energy meter had taken a 40% dive. 40 hours of energy spent in a single shot, and I winced at it before deciding I would burn the same 40 hours over again if the situation called for it. Cheap at the price. My stomach growled again, and I picked up the half-eaten crab leg off the floor, sat down at the table and ate. The crab meat had no salt and no spice, and should have tasted like nothing, but instead it came in faintly sweet, the flesh tender and clean. An honest dinner that probably tasted better because of adrenaline burning through calories I had not expected to spend. I worked through the leg, then the claw, then both, and by the time the plate was clean, I had eaten meat for 3 people and felt none of it. The drowsiness rolled in heavy, the kind that follows real mental exhaustion, and by the time I stretched out on the wooden bed, I was already half under, asleep before I could finish the thought. Sometime past midnight the mist began to churn, black silhouettes flickering through the edge of the white candlelight's reach, things bigger than mermen and faster than them, throwing strange shapes against the wall of white before vanishing back inside it. The sounds that came with them were not in any language I would have recognized, and the chat channel was awake the whole way through, players who could not sleep posting frantic descriptions of what was crawling around outside their own bubbles of light. The standing consensus by morning was that there were genuine monsters in the mist after dark, and the only mercy was that they seemed to stay inside the mist. The lighthouse's 3-meter ring enough to keep them off the door. I slept through every minute of it. Daylight crossed my face and I rolled away from it and dropped back under, only for the system to ping me awake a second later, congratulating all surviving Tower Guardians on making it through the first night and announcing that the control panel and the crafting station were now deploying. The control panel managed lighthouse and island, including upgrades and energy recharging. The crafting station crafted items. 2 new fixtures had quietly materialized against the wall by the stairs, an angular console with a glass face and a square wooden table with carved sigils across its surface. And I was halfway to my feet when the regional announcement rolled across the sky, congratulating Tower Guardian Wang Xin for being the first Tower Guardian to upgrade her lighthouse, claiming the bronze treasure chest, the random candlelight, and the random blueprint that came with first place. I stared at the wall, that fast, then sprinted to the control panel, slapped the lighthouse page open, and stabbed the upgrade button as if it might run away. The system asked whether I wanted to spend 100 wood and 100 stone on the upgrade, and I confirmed before the prompt had finished resolving. The announcement rolled again, congratulating Tower Guardian Im San for being second to upgrade his lighthouse and claim a black iron treasure chest, a random candlelight, and a random blueprint, and a breath later third place went to a Tower Guardian named Yuk Shi with the matching wooden treasure chest, plus the same paired prizes. I let out the breath I had been holding, because a second slower and I would have been third. Second was not where I wanted to be, but the gap between second and third reward was wide enough that I took the spread without complaining, and it also helped that the first placeholder was the woman who dissected Merman on camera, since I had no interest in attracting Huang Xin's attention by leapfrogging her on the leaderboard. Second was perfect, out of the way and in the money. I pulled the lighthouse panel up. White 2-star, main effect still white candlelight, no special effect. Energy back at 100%, next upgrade 200 wood and 200 stone, with the evaluation noting that the lighthouse was at least a little sturdier now, and not as drafty. A good chunk of the holes in the walls and doorframe had quietly closed up, and another upgrade or two would fully seal the room. Best of all, the energy bar had reset to full on the upgrade. 40 hours of energy refunded for the cost of 200 raw resources. Useful intel for later. I opened the Sealand page. Tidal Island, white 1-star, 3,000 square meters, special effect tidal effect doubled. Upgrade requiring 1,000 stone, 10 times the lighthouse's stone cost. I whistled at that and closed the page. The crafting station opened to 2 options, basic furniture crafting and blueprint crafting. The basic furniture catalog gave me wooden beds, wooden chairs, and wooden tables, each at 1 wood apiece, every one a clean upgrade over the warped rejects already in the room. So I queued a new wooden bed, wooden chair, and wooden table at 3 wood total. Half an hour per piece, the panel told me. I exited and opened blueprint crafting, which was empty by default, with a small recessed slot on the surface of the table sized for a blueprint card. I dropped the toilet paper blueprint into the slot. The crafting station chimed and asked whether to record, and I confirmed. The recipe slotted into the menu as toilet paper white 1-star, 1 wood per pack of about 20 sheets. The evaluation cheerfully noting the product was clean and hygienic and all natural and silky smooth. I dumped my entire wood stockpile of 174 pieces into the queue, the crafting station ticking off a pack every second or so, and I sat back and laughed at the room. Toilet paper of all the things. Toilet paper, and I was about to corner the regional market on the most universally needed product known to man. I claimed the second place reward bundle and the rewards dropped into the inventory at once. The black iron treasure chest popped open with a soft chime, dropping 3 items, a black scale long sleeve at green 3-star, a green algae head at green 1-star, and a sharp iron axe at white 7-star. The black scale long sleeve was a top forged from the same black scale sea beast material as my pants, the panel noting it would shrug off the claws of a juvenile shallow sea crab, provided my body was tough enough to take the impact through it. So I peeled off the linen undershirt and pulled the long sleeve on, the shirt resizing to fit on contact. Now I had a matched set top and bottom in black, and I muttered that if a night fight broke out, nobody was going to see me coming. The green algae head was a flat scrap of marine algae rated green 1-star, listed as bait, capable of attracting rare sea creatures when placed at a tide pool before low tide, with a note that I might get something or might get nothing. I knew exactly which pit I was dropping it in, the big depression in the middle of the reef field with the half-meter gaps in its walls just narrow enough to trap big fish. A natural fishing spot. The sharp iron axe was a meter 20 of polished blade at white 7-star, effect accelerated tree cutting, a strong piece of equipment but useless for now since I was not cutting down the dozen scraggly trees on Tidal Island, unless the world ended. I packed the axe away as a future use tool. The random blueprint resolved into a fireplace blueprint at green 1-star, the blueprint that taught the crafting station to build a fireplace for warmth and burning, and I dropped it into the recess and confirmed the record. Inside cooking, finally, I lined the random candlelight up for last. The system listed it at blue 6-star, noting that on use it would yield a candlelight ranging from green 6-star to blue 9-star, and that this prize tier was reserved for top 3 placements only. I used it, and the system gave me an azure candlelight at blue 6-star. Effect dispels sea mist within a 600-meter radius. Special effect attracts certain unspecified existences. Description that every special candlelight was extremely rare, and the kind of prize countless tower guardians dreamed of. 600-meter radius from a lighthouse that had a 3-meter ring an hour ago. A 200-fold reach. With the azure candlelight and the brazier, I could walk the beach in full mist or full dark and stay inside a bubble of clear air the whole way, which meant night gathering was about to open up for me. I opened the control panel, went to the lighthouse page, and tapped change candlelight, but the system warned me that the new candlelight would consume the old one on swap, which I read twice. A higher tier ordinary candlelight in the future would forcibly retire the azure candlelight if I were dumb enough to swap. So I made a mental note to never swap again unless the new candle was a clear special effect win. Then I confirmed the change, and on the second floor the white candlelight flickered out, replaced by a flame the color of deep red, with an azure thread running through its core climbing the brazier. The cast light on the walls and floor stayed warm yellow, which was good, because if it had cast in azure the lighthouse would have looked like a haunted aquarium. By the time I came back down, the crafting station had finished half the toilet paper queue, packs rolling off into the output slot, and I opened the chat channel and posted the offer at 10 stone a pack. First come first served. The channel detonated, the run selling out in 30 seconds. players screaming that 174 packs was nowhere near enough for 100,000 people. One woman tagging me to ask if any was left for her sister on her period. Another woman offering to give the sister half her stash for free. And a male player wedging in to offer his services as a junior brother in exchange for daily food and getting politely told to get lost. I closed the channel, grinning at the math. 1,000 stones earned in under a minute on a stack of toilet paper. The planned second batch reinvestment was pointless for the moment, since another batch could wait. Right now I had a Sealand to upgrade. I went back to the control panel, opened the Sealand page, and tapped upgrade with the 1,000 stone from the toilet paper run already on hand. The Sky announcement rolled across the region congratulating Tower Guardian Im San for being the first Tower Guardian to upgrade his Sealand, claiming a bronze treasure chest, a random Sealand trait, and a random blueprint. I almost crowed, and then the second announcement landed, congratulating Tower Guardian Huang Xin for second place on the Sealand upgrade with a black iron treasure chest, a random Sealand trait, and a random blueprint. I stared at the announcement. How in the name of the deep blue sea had Huang Xin produced 1,000 stone before I had even finished my auction? I had been the only player in the region with currency, the lighthouse gold coins from the yellow 9-star special chest, and those were no good without a maritime merchant to spend them at. Huang Xin had either pulled stones out of an ability, a talent, or some private mechanic the rest of us did not know about yet. I shook my head and muttered I was not going to lose sleep over it, since first place this round was mine. The bronze treasure chest opened with a soft click, dropping 2 items, a cream strawberry seed at green 6-star and a furniture upgrade card at blue 1-star. I frowned at the count, since 2 items was lean, but every chest's drop spread varied and I was first place either way. The cream strawberry seed was a soybean-sized pellet that grew into cream strawberries, a fruit with a strong cream flavor and an extremely smooth texture, and I planted it on the spot in the wooden box with the sullen soil. The soil wet enough that I did not need to water it down. The furniture upgrade card was a rare consumable that bumped furniture below blue tier up 1 major grade, capped at blue 1-star, and since I had nothing worth upgrading yet, I set the card on the control panel shelf to keep it out of the way. The random Sealand trait was the new reward, the bonus that came with first place Sealand upgrades. Range green 6-star to blue 9-star. I used it, and the system delivered a coral coast at blue 3-star. Effect on loading a coral area would form along the coast, and would not retreat during low tide. Description that coral coasts were rich in resources and attracted a variety of marine creatures fond of coral. I loaded the trait into the island at once, and the system prompted me to stay inside the lighthouse while the Sealand renovated. Through the window, the junction between the reef field and the open beach was sinking inward, the sand sliding into a wide depression, a coral area in the making. I muttered that I had not expected the coast to drop instead of rise, then turned away. The random blueprint came last, the system delivering an exquisite single-bed blueprint at green 9-star. The fine print called it a one-time blueprint with materials already inserted. 20 restwood, 10 cotton, and 1 ice spirit silk. And on use I would receive an exquisite single bed. A preloaded one-time blueprint handing me a green 9-star bed on a platter. Fine by me. I used it, and the exquisite single bed materialized in the inventory. A clean piece of furniture infinitely better than the wooden bed still being crafted on the crafting station. I sprinted to the station and canceled the wooden bed before the half hour ran out. Good thing I had queued the wooden chair first. The panel called the bed green 9-star, slightly improving sleep quality and slightly improving mental recovery. The description noting that waking up refreshed started with a good bed. I set the exquisite single bed up. The mattress was clean white, cool under my hand, slightly soft, and when I tested it by lying flat, the bed felt fit for a human being. I closed my eyes for a beat in pure satisfaction, then opened them on a ceiling that was marginally improved over yesterday's, and said out loud that I might as well use Gift of Fate while I was lying down. The panel popped up. Gift of Fate had chosen 10 days of lifespan, cost none, and I sat up so fast I nearly hit my head on the ceiling. I read the panel 3 times to be sure of it. 10 days of lifespan, free, no cost, no catch. From ancient times to now, every emperor and every alchemist had killed themselves chasing extra days on the clock, and my talent was offering 10 of them for the price of activating it. My eyes were going to fall out of my head. 10 days was probably going to feel like nothing, since I was 23 years old, and 10 extra days on the back end of a normal lifespan was a rounding error. But 10 free days was still 10 free days. If Gift of Fate had a habit of offering this kind of upside, then any day the talent decided to gift me with a year, or 10 years, or a century, the talent would have paid for itself 1,000 times over. I confirmed the gift, the panel dissolved, no sensation, no fanfare, no light show, no chime. The 10 days disappearing into me as if they had always been there. Trust the system to deliver the most heaven-defying reward of the day with absolutely zero theater. I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and decided I would file the moment away under things to brag about exactly nowhere. The system pinged that the tide was 30 minutes from receding. I pulled the projection up and checked today's weather, sunny and breezy. Weather effect ordinary. More wood would appear after the tide receded on my sealand. I closed the projection and muttered that the system had given me a trash effect, then turned for the door and immediately tripped over something. A wooden treasure chest was sitting on its end right at the threshold like a polite delivery, with no note attached. I scratched my head and connected the dot. Last night's eye in the door, the thing with mental control. Merman dropped wooden treasure chests on death, and the chat channel had confirmed any sea beast that died at the lighthouse left its drop on the porch. And even though the thing I had iced over had not been a merman, the rule had held. I grinned and tapped the chest. A single coconut bread dropped into the inventory, the chest vanishing. The blood-eyed mental control monster had nearly killed me. I had spent 40 hours of lighthouse energy and an ice crystal shot to put it down, and the chest had paid out exactly 1 coconut bread white 3-star ordinary food, filling and slightly more interesting than black bread. No other effect. The universe had decided last night's panic attack was worth breakfast. I ate the coconut bread on the way out the door, working my jaw with the same expressionless patience the system had paid me with. The coral area had finished forming overnight, the junction between the reef and the beach now a depression a few meters deep, full of water, ringed with fresh coral in fan shapes and antler shapes and brain shapes that swayed faintly with the current. Fish were already swimming through the coral, which surprised me since the sealands were barely a day old, but small marine life had drifted in fast. Across the reef, thumb-sized crabs were scurrying around with small shrimp and small fish, and given a few more days' food would be the easiest of my problems. Although in the opening hours, scarcity was still the rule. The tide receded on the half hour, and the coral area held its water rather than draining as the trait description had promised. I stepped past it into the reef field, and 2 steps in I saw a fresh pile of wood, the weather effect doing its boring job. By the time I had crossed the reef into the open beach, I had 67 pieces of wood and 2 more wooden treasure chests. The beach gave up another find right away, a chest-sized item that was not a treasure chest at all, but an empty seashell, 2 meters tall, beautiful, a single valve as wide as I was. I knocked on it. Thick. The panel called it a falling star seashell. Material, green 4-star, no effect. Description that this was the old shed shell of a falling star seashell, and that placed near the sea the shell had a chance to attract hermit crabs and was a crafting material for some items. I pictured a hermit crab the size of the shell and shuddered. The shallow sea crab and the giant mantis shrimp had been juveniles at over a meter long. Hermit crabs at the same scale would be apartment buildings. I packed the shell anyway, on the grounds that anything green 4-star was worth keeping. The rest of the beach was the same story. Plenty of wood, not much stone, no treasure chests at all. I muttered that my luck for the day must be capped somewhere, and walked to the edge of the coral area. The water was 3 meters deep at the rim. I crouched at the edge, weighed what I knew, and committed to wading in. The coral area was on my own sea land. The newbie benefit period guaranteed that the sea beasts here would not attack me without provocation, and my underwater breathing was wasted if I never used it. As for the merman at night, the merman was a thing of the mist, not a sea beast, and the rules covering sea beasts probably did not cover it. I stepped off the edge. The water closed over my head and air filled my chest as easily as if I had been on dry land. The deep-sea mermaid pearl held up its end. I also discovered in the first kick that I was stronger in the water than I had been on land. A single push of one leg moved me 3 meters. I rolled the new sensation around in my head. The water-based extraordinary attribute maybe, granting a baseline boost in any water environment. The mermaid pearl maybe, since it had been a mermaid's. Either explanation worked. The combined effect was that in the coral area my agility outclassed any of the small marine life around me. I swam the coral area in a slow loop, taking the time to look. The coral was every color of an aquarium dump. Beautiful, useless, no wood, no stone. 2 wooden treasure chests sat on the seabed without guardians. Free salvage, which I packed away. Tidal Island had picked up 1,000 square meters in the upgrade, bringing the area to 4,000 square meters. Still tiny in absolute terms, only about 70 meters across, and a chunk of it was still submerged. I swam to the edge of the sealand and looked down. The sea was bottomless beneath me. I had no idea how many meters of visibility I had under the keel of my own island, but past that visibility was pitch black, a wall of dark water that swallowed the eye. My sealand was not an island in any normal sense. It was a flat raft of land suspended above the ocean, with nothing supporting it from below. The image of 100 giant sea beasts looking up at me out of that blackness arrived without invitation. I sucked in a breath that, thanks to the pearl, did not even cost me any oxygen. I turned and swam back to the shallows fast enough that I left awake. The deep blue could keep its secrets. Tomorrow's problem. Back at the surface, I climbed out, wiped my face, and checked the inventory. 2 wooden treasure chests, the falling star seashell, a couple of empty wooden boxes pulled from the reef shallows, wood, stone, a morning's haul. The coral area had carried the day. With no coral area, I would have come back from this tide with almost nothing. I climbed up to the lighthouse and opened the 2 wooden treasure chests, white 2-star and white 1-star bottom of the wooden line. Between them, they paid out a bottle of purified water, 2 pieces of black bread, and a plain dagger at white 1-star, and I grumbled that the chests had been unguarded for a reason. The 2 wooden boxes I emptied as well, one with a couple of water apples in it and the other bare, and I kept both as containers, since a wooden box could hold 10 water apples comfortably and I had 8, with the second box reserved for black bread. By the time I had loaded the boxes and set them aside, the tabletop was clean, and the new wooden table and chair were already done at the crafting station. I swapped out the old furniture and looked around the room, which had 3 pieces of decent furniture and a stone tower, a palace by lighthouse survival standards. I queued my entire wood supply into the crafting station as toilet paper. 138 wood meant 138 packs by sundown, half going on the market for wood and half for stone. The next sealant upgrade pre-funded. I took the green algae head out to the reef and walked to the largest tide pool depression on the field, the one I had been eyeing yesterday. About 3 meters across and a meter and change deep, with half-meter gaps in its rim that big fish could not slip through. I dropped the green algae head into the water at the center, watched it sink, and told the empty pit good luck. The next low tide would tell me whether the bait had worked. On the way back, I detoured to the edge of the small forest and pulled the black iron spear out for some real practice. 2 meters of black iron, 30 pounds, head as wide as my hand. I planted myself 1.5 meters from the nearest trunk and started running stab drills, the point leaving a fresh mark on the bark each time. I was not training for power, I was training for accuracy, the plan being to put the spearhead through an eyeball at full extension with no second pass needed. Every stab earned a mark. Every mark off center got noted in my head and corrected on the next swing. An hour in, I was sweating through the black scale long sleeve and my forearms had started to shake, so I put the spear down and stretched out the cramp, telling myself the body was not built for more than an hour at my level. The kind of grind that turned a hobby gym rat into a soldier was not a one-day project, and I had only lasted the hour because I had been a casual lifter back home. I walked back to the lighthouse, dropped into the new wooden chair, and drained a bottle of purified water in one long pull. The room smelled like sweat and crab, and the faintest trace of toilet paper, which I supposed counted as home. I checked the time, 12:30 in the afternoon, and pulled the giant mantis shrimps panel up to see whether the inventory had bought me a window on the meat. The system labeled the shrimp slightly rotten. Eating it would invite diarrhea, so I made my peace with the loss and decided the shrimp would serve as bait at another pit, since 2 fishing spots were better than 1. I checked my pantry. 3.5 pieces of black bread, 1 piece of exquisite bread, and the exquisite bread would not keep long, so I ate it for lunch then and there. 1 loaf left me at 80% full. The body of the bread generous and soft, far better than the black brick. 2 bottles of purified water on the shelf, water scarcer than food, which would catch up with me sooner or later, since seafood was renewable but fresh water was not. I opened the chat channel and scrolled the marketplace, mostly trade chatter from a region full of tower guardians with nothing but barter. The bidding running hot. Prices were criminal across the board. Someone selling coconuts at 50 wood or stone apiece, which was either a bad joke or open robbery, and fish on offer that I had no use for since I was full. I closed the channel without buying and watched the toilet paper finish its run. An hour vanished without my noticing, the way an hour does in any chat channel with 90,000 bored players in it. And the system pinged, half an hour to the next low tide. I dumped the new pile of wood I had bought from the morning's toilet paper sales into the crafting station for a fresh batch and headed out for the second tide of the day. The toilet paper business was a 1 to 10 profit margin and would only last until everyone got a crafting station of their own, which was a window of days, not weeks. So I would milk it while it lasted. Today's sales had pulled in 690 wood and 690 stone, enough to fund the next lighthouse upgrade outright. I was holding off on that upgrade for now. The top 3 rewards for a white tier lighthouse upgrade had probably already run their course. The next rank up, a green tier lighthouse, was where the prize structure might shift, and I wanted to see if the top 3 slots there carried something better than candlelight and chests. I came down to the junction of the reef field and the coral area. 2 baited spots waited for me, one with the green algae head, one with the dead mantis shrimp. I was hoping for surprises out of both. The reef field's regular gather was the usual wood and not much else. The system's weather effect today was, as promised, the most boring on the menu. While I worked, I checked every crevice for hidden fish or small crabs, and saw plenty of them, all of them thumb-sized. My sealand was already starting to register on the local marine life, the same way a new island in real-world geography draws colonizers, but the volume of colonizers was still small. Then I saw something different. An anchor. It was about 1 meter tall, rusted to the color of dried blood, half buried in the sand at the seam between 2 reefs. I knocked the sand off it and pulled it free. The thing was easily several hundred pounds. I shoved it into the inventory and watched the panel resolve. Abandoned anchor, material, white 4-star, no effect. With a description that the anchor had been abandoned for some unknown length of time and could be broken down into iron blocks on a forging table. Forging table. New device. I had not been told about a forging table yet, which meant the 3rd unlock in the toolkit was coming tomorrow at the earliest. That tracked. The control panel in the crafting station had unlocked this morning. A forging table would be tomorrow's reveal. By the end of the 3-day newbie benefit period, I would probably have the full opening suite of devices. I muttered that the lighthouse survival system was at least consistent in its pacing, even if it was perfunctory in its writing. I kept walking and came up on the first baited pit, the smaller one with the dead mantis shrimp at the bottom. I peered over the edge. The shrimp's corpse was already half eaten by the small marine life that had moved in. Inside the pit, a couple of small crabs and small fish were still working at it, none of them paying any attention to me. So far so good for a bait spot. I scanned the rest of the pool and saw a fish that emitted a faint white glow, the same kind of soft shimmer that wood and stone gave off when they registered as a resource on this world. It was a feature the system seemed to use to flag everything worth picking up. I dropped into the pit. The crabs and small fish around the mantis shrimp corpse did not flinch. Eating for them was the only priority. I walked straight to the glowing fish, scooped it up in one hand, and let it slap me with its tail for the next 10 seconds. The panel resolved. Red flower raspora. Fish, green 1 star. The effect line reading that on consumption there was an extremely low chance of gaining a point in a random extraordinary attribute, with the description adding that the red flower raspora was a type of spirit fish, that the higher the spirit fish's rating the better the effect on consumption, that a spirit fish cooked by a master chef gave a multiplied effect, and that eating 10 red flower raspora was guaranteed to deliver a full point of extraordinary attribute on the 10th fish. A spirit fish that handed out extraordinary attribute on consumption, now we were talking. A fish that filled you up and made you stronger was every survivalist's dream. I told the red flower raspora out loud that it was going to be my dinner, and the red flower raspora slapped me with its tail in the closest thing to a comeback that a fish has. I put the fish in a smaller pit, scooped in some seawater from the rim, and dropped a smashed crab in beside it as a last meal. The red flower raspora ignored me and ate the crab. I told it to be good, then walked off to check the larger pit. The larger pit was where I had dropped the green algae head, and the green algae head was supposed to attract rare sea creatures. I came over the rim with anticipation flat against my chest. A giant shallow sea crab was at the bottom of the pit, eating the green algae head with steady audible crunches. Our eyes met. The crab looked up at me. The crab's claws twitched. The body wanted to charge, but the newbie benefit period held the crab's leash, and it could only stand there and look at me with the open contempt of something that knew it was going to lose this round. I let the surprise pass and sized up the situation. The shallow sea crab was a size larger than the one I had killed yesterday, still a juvenile by the look of it, no real threat. The pit's walls were 2 meters of clean rock. The crab could not climb out, and even if it tried, I would knock it back down with a black iron spear. The walls did not just trap the crab, they made the crab a stationary target. I scanned the pit, and at the far end, against the wall, I saw a black iron treasure chest sitting unguarded. I muttered that I was rich. The pit had paid out twice. I shrugged the black iron spear off my shoulder, lined up the crab's back, and laughed under my breath that this was the first real chance to put yesterday's hour of spear drills to the test. That I was going for the eye on the first stab. The black iron spear came down. The spearhead drove against the back shell of the shallow sea crab and stopped, the strength not quite enough to punch through. A clean note rang off the shell. A small scratch marked the impact, and the spear bounced back into my grip. The strength was not there. The black iron spear should have been able to drive through the shell of a juvenile shallow sea crab. The fact that it had not told me everything I needed to know about how far short of a real warrior I still was. I shook the bounce out of my hand, and admitted the shallow sea crab's back shell was harder than the shaft had wanted it to be. The crab heard the impact and scuttled at me at once, claws clacking out a furious little march. But the pit was the pit, and to come at me it had to climb up 2 meters of slick rock first. I let it get a body length up the wall, and swept the black iron spear across the side of its leading legs, and the giant crab tumbled back to the bottom with a dry crash. I told it from the rim that it was not coming up here, and it answered with a flurry of claw clicks that I read as disagreement. Then I drove the spear in again, and this time the crab had bunched closer to my side of the pit, which put its eye in range, and I aimed for the eye on the strength of yesterday's hour of bark drills. The black iron spear punched in clean, and a wet crunch told me the head had gone past the socket and into something soft on the far side. The crab seized up around the shaft, both pincers locking around the iron like a bear trap, and started hauling it out of me. Pure muscle was never going to win that pull. I felt my heels slide an inch toward the rim, then another inch, the crab's strength running clean through the spear into my arms. So I quit pulling and went looking for a brace, and a hand of stone stood up out of the reef a meter back from me. Exactly the shape I needed. I propped the spear butt against the stone and let the crab fight the rock instead of me. Sad ending for ambition, I thought. I muttered out loud that if I had brought the great iron hammer, I could have ended this in 80 swings. But the black iron spear was already in, and pulling out a stuck spear to swap weapons was the kind of clever move that gets a guy killed. So I went around the long way, because the shallow sea crab's blind spot is its back the same as every crab on Blue Star, and a crab in a pit cannot turn on a dime. I climbed down behind it, pressed both palms against the back shell, and shoved with my full weight, telling it that it was you and me now, and that I needed it to step forward. The crab took 2 more steps onto the spear, with my push behind it, the shaft sliding deeper through the eye socket, and into whatever was on the far side of the head, and after another 10 seconds, the tip came up against the inside of the back shell, with a dry crunch, and pushed clean through, the iron point glittering in front of my face 2 inches from my own nose. Holy cow, I almost said out loud, since I had almost stuck myself with my own spear. I let go of the haft, sat back on my heels, and watched the giant crab spasm twice and stop. The pit was suddenly very quiet around me, just the slow drip of seawater off the reef walls and the dull rasp of my breath in my throat. I climbed up to the chest first because the chest was the whole reason I had taken the fight, and the panel resolved with a long name that made me grin all the way across my face. Lightwater Black Iron Treasure Chest. Common, white 5-star, no effect. Description that a chest with a prefix had a chance to contain items related to the prefix. So a prefixed black iron chest sat at white 5-star, the same way the sea salt wooden treasure chest yesterday had sat above the standard white 3-star wooden ceiling. The prefix and the rating sat in different brackets of the panel, and I made a note of that for the chat channel later. I packed the chest into the inventory and went back to the crab. The shallow sea crab's 2 great pincers came off cleanly with a bit of work at the joints, and I added them to the inventory. The rest of the body I left in the pit as standing bait, the way the dead mantis shrimp had pulled in small crabs and small fish at the other pit. And I made a mental note to check both pits at the next low tide. Then I climbed out of the reef, broke through to the open beach, and walked the line. The beach was the simplest terrain on the system's catalog, the rest of the list running reef, beach, gravel beach, mudflat, coral, and mangrove. And on the beach, every threat showed up the moment it appeared. Boring as a result, but safe. I picked up wood and stone all the way down the strand and turned at the far end without seeing so much as a wooden treasure chest, which tracked because all the good loot in this sealand was still gathering in the reef. The coral area was the third leg, and I had no intention of skipping it. I checked the air in my chest, walked to the rim, and stepped off. The water closed over me and the deep-sea mermaid pearl held up its end the same way it had yesterday. I swam the coral area slow, with my eyes wide, and the second the bottom came clear I saw something glowing brighter than the red flower rasbora had glowed. Brighter and steadier, the soft pearled light of a resource shell sitting wedged between 2 coral fans. I kicked over to it, scooped it up, and the panel resolved into pearl shell, green 1-star, effect a chance to contain pearls, description that pearl shells came in many varieties and the pearls inside had a chance to be special. I weighed it in my palm-sized, and admitted if a special pearl came out of one of these the prize would be worth a long swim. I added it to the inventory and kept looking. Half an hour in the coral area gave me 2 pearl shells, 1 wooden treasure chest sitting unguarded on the seabed, 1 sea cucumber, and a quiet menagerie of small marine life I left alone on the grounds that anything renewable was worth more standing than worth 1 meal. The one find that made me stop was a coral. Scarlet coral, blue 1-star, effect purifies water quality, increases spiritual energy, replenishes chi and blood. Description that scarlet coral was a rare strain that could clean impurities out of seawater and lift the local energy concentration, and was a hard-to-find crafting material with a wide range of uses. Blue 1-star out of a day-old coral area on Tidal Island, and the thing was only half the size of my palm, which meant it was a newly seeded resource still in its first growth. I cupped my hand under the stalk, weighed whether to pull it for storage and let it go, since resources that grew were worth more left to grow than yanked early. I came up at the seam between the coral area and the reef, shook the water out of my hair, and walked over to the smaller of the 2 baited pits to collect my red flower rasbora before I forgot. The fish was still alive in the side basin, ate the rest of the smashed crab on its way out, and slapped me with its tail once for the principle of the thing. I packed it into the inventory, and on the way back to the lighthouse I opened the bag and ran the day's ledger across the projection in my head. Black iron spear, 64 pieces of wood, 927 stones, 1 light water black iron treasure chest, 2 shallow sea crab pincers, 1 red flower rasbora, 1 sea cucumber, 2 pearl shells. The stone count alone was a windfall, the spear of yesterday's drill still in my hand, and the chest waiting at the top of the hall. Back inside the lighthouse, I rejected the bonfire approach this time and queued a fireplace at the crafting station. 20 stones, a cleaner cook than open flame, and walled in by the new wooden table. The crafting station also took my 174 packs of toilet paper as queued and started ticking, and the fireplace took 20 more minutes to land. While that ran, I stepped outside to gut the fish. The sky was starting to drop into the orange end of itself, 6 o'clock by the panel clock, sundown at 7 sharp. I gutted the red flower rasbora on the wooden table outside, ran a stick through it, and brought it back in. The crab claws went on next to it on their own sticks. The sea cucumber I had a different plan for, since boiling it would carry the flavor better than dry roast. I smashed the side of one claw open at the joint, scooped the half shell empty, and ladled in salted seawater from the coral area along with the sea cucumber. The makings of a soup poured into a crab shell crock, and I muttered to nobody in particular that island cuisine had its own quiet elegance. The fireplace finished, the fire took, the smoke pulled cleanly up the flue the way an outdoor pit never had, and dinner started to come together. While the fish browned, I dropped into the new wooden chair and laid out the pearl shells and the light water black iron treasure chest on the table to open them in order. Pearl shells first, since pearl shells were the cheaper opener. The first one I pried open with a spare dagger, the hinge giving under the blade, and the inside was nothing but clean white clam meat. I muttered that scallop did not pay rent, then noticed a piece of dried scallop fall out of the side of the crab claw pot, as if the disappointment had triggered a quiet trade somewhere off camera, and conceded that some of the day's small ironies were probably worth eating. The second shell I pried with more care, and there was a pearl in it the size of my thumb, snow white, smooth as glass. The panel called it white pearl. Material, green 1 star, no effect. Description, an ordinary white pearl of excellent quality that a maritime merchant would probably take an interest in. Beautiful for the size, ordinary for the type, and I set it on the table for later trade. A maritime merchant existed somewhere in this system, and lighthouse gold coins were already piling up in my soaked box, which meant somewhere down the road, those two facts were going to meet. Then the main event of the night, the lightwater black iron treasure chest itself. The chest came apart with a soft splinter, and the system listed 2 drops, lightwater iron shield and iron frame blueprint. 2 items only, which made me sigh that the chest had paid in quality at the expense of quantity. The way the yellow 9-star deep-sea chest had paid out only 4 items, but every one of those items had been a small revolution. The shield came up first, listed as lightwater iron shield, green 7-star, effect lightweight and sturdy. Description, forged from light iron ore and exceptionally light, without losing structural integrity. I pulled it out of the inventory, 50 centimeters tall, 30 across, a hand thick. By the look of the panel, it should have weighed 30 pounds, and instead came in at maybe 10, light enough to wear strapped across my back without slowing me down. I called it the Lightwater Series Proof of Concept, and packed it back into the inventory, since a shield I did not have a free hand for was a shield I could put down later. Good piece for the day. Huang Xin's chat channel diagrams turned out to be incomplete. The iron frame blueprint was next. Green 1-star, the recipe to teach the crafting station to make an iron frame as an ordinary defensive structure. 1 iron block required per frame. I did not own a single iron block, but I did own a several 100-pound rusted anchor sitting in the inventory. And I owned the knowledge that a forging table was the obvious unlock for tomorrow, so the iron frame was a recipe parked on the crafting station with no fuel for the moment. I dropped the blueprint into the recess and confirmed the record, and the crafting station chimed and added the recipe to the menu without complaint. The day of forging table dropped. I had a use for the anchor and a use for the frame both, and the chest had paid me 2 items and 3 plans. A heavy thud cracked outside the wall, fire kindling popping in the fireplace, and I looked up at the window to find the sky had gone fully black between 2 breaths the way it had last night. The brazier on the second floor came alive almost on the same beat, only this time the flame was the azure candlelight, not the white candlelight, and the wash it threw over the room came in warm yellow with a thin azure thread climbing through the center. I muttered that an island lit from the top by an azure flame would be visible to anything in the sea for a long, long way. I climbed up to the brazier, looked out across the railing, and admitted I had a problem. The azure candlelight pushed its 600-meter ring out over the water without breaking a sweat, dispelling the night mist clean to the horizon, but with the mist gone, my whole sea land stood lit up in the dark like a stage. Anything in the water that was used to hunting by what came out of the mist could now see the whole island, and the whole island could see nothing back. The mist had been a curtain, and without the curtain, my house was on display for every hungry thing in the dark. I went back down with a fresh case of nerves and checked the fish, which had only minutes left. While I waited, I caught myself staring out the window at the way the surface of the sea moved under the azure candlelight's wash, the small lap of waves looking like the dorsal lines of things that probably were not there. "Stop scaring yourself," I muttered to the empty room, and turned back to the fireplace, because a person who eats is a soul who eats, and eating is the soul of any sane survivor. The red flower raspbora came off the stick blistering hot, and I burned the roof of my mouth on the first bite, because of course I did. The flesh was sweet and clean even without salt, and 3 to 4 pounds of fish went down without filling me up, which was new. Hunger had grown a layer since the overmortal jump, the body more efficient at running through calories. I picked at the crab claw next, soup-warm crab meat at the bottom, and finished the meal with the dried scallop fished out of the soup, big as a ping-pong ball, briny and sweet. I patted my stomach and conceded that eating had become my favorite hobby. I opened the chat channel to clear the toilet paper queue, posted 690 packs at 10 wood a pack, picked wood over stone this time to keep the toilet paper feedstock topped up, and the listing burned to 0 in seconds. The chat channel detonated with the same chorus as the morning, with the same standing request for sister access, and I closed it grinning. 6,900 pieces of wood sat in the inventory by the time the screen went quiet, and another batch of toilet paper went straight back onto the crafting station. 24,700 packs sitting in queue as a strategic asset. The trade chat was alive with 100,000 people who had nothing to barter with each other except basic resources, and I had the only monopoly in town for a window that was going to close inside a week, give or take. The day the second place crafting station unlocks reached the next player. I traded the spare crab claws to a player named Jang Ye, the same one I had clocked yesterday with a self-destructing talent that produced 1 piece of random food a day, since he was the only person in the region who could be trusted to consistently have food to swap. We added each other as friends. His morning bread became tomorrow's breakfast in a single trade, a small reliable hedge against any day the system decided to be cute about food drops. A heavy thud hit the window I had closed earlier, a soft slap of water against glass, and a second one followed. The rhythm, not the door pound rhythm of a merman knocking, but the wet smack of a body throwing itself at the lighthouse. I grabbed the black iron spear and crossed to the window in one stride. The chat channel was already screaming. The chat was already screaming that mermen were everywhere. Dozens of them this time. The shore on every player's sea land crawling with the things, 100 times worse than the lone door visitor the channel had been laughing about a single night ago. I opened the regional channel and let it run as I looked. Some players were posting photos of mermen carrying tatty rusted knives, which was new, since last night every merman had been barehanded. One photo showed a merman with a wooden chest under its arm, which made the player laugh that the gift had walked itself to the door. The general consensus was that the mermen were converging the way fish school, that the lit lighthouses were drawing them like moths. I muttered that an azure candlelight throwing 600 meters of clear air across the sea had drawn the swarm to me specifically, and looked through the window again. The window faced the coral area, and the coral area was indeed seeded with mermen, dozens of them, already on the beach, more still surfacing from below the waterline. My goosebumps stood up the same way they had during the eye in the door last night. I counted, and the count climbed by 2s and 3s as more bodies came up. 38 mermen, give or take, with 13 of them carrying tatty weapons and 19 barehanded, 5 more hauling treasure chests slung under their arms the way you'd carry kindling. And one of them, planted in the middle of the group, was a full head taller than the rest and wore a crude crown of bent metal on its skull, with a staff held in its other hand, which left no real question about the title. Merman King, I said out loud, and the Merman King's eyes met mine through the window for a beat, his face contorting into what I could only read as a snarl, and then the whole group turned as one and began to march for the lighthouse door. The chat channel screams from other regions had not stopped, but mine was about to begin its own. I checked the lighthouse panel, which read white 3-star with energy at 100%, with 3,450 wood and 3,450 stone sitting in the bank from the toilet paper run. I could buy 4 full upgrades if the cost curve held, and 4 upgrades meant 4 free energy resets. 800% of effective lighthouse energy was, by the math I had run during yesterday's merman scare, going to be enough to outlast this swarm even if every merman in the crowd took a turn at the door, probably. The first wave came in fast, the leading merman breaking into a run on those bow legs that the chat channel claimed should have been slow on land and turning out to be faster than the chat thought. The closest merman to me reached the door and stood with its slack-jawed face inches from the wood, waiting for the Merman King to give a command. I looked at the gap in the door at eye level for the merman, drew the spear back, lined the head with the gap, and let it through. The black iron spear slid clean through the upper hole and into the merman's skull above one eye, and the body dropped to the porch like a sack of wet rope. I pulled the spear back in before the next merman could reach for it, and the porch went silent. 40 fish heads stared at the dropped one, and after a beat the Merman King let out a wet bellow, and the swarm went for the door at once. The tatty knives went to work on the wood, the bare hands hammering at the panels around them, and the energy bar at the bottom of my projection started its slow countdown. The chat channel had said a merman could pound the lighthouse door for 10 minutes and only burn 1% of energy, and the math held here, with 1% draining off every couple of seconds against the rhythm of the strikes. 4 or 5 mermen could fit at the door at once, and any more than that started splitting off to hit the window walls. If I let it run untreated, I would burn through energy faster than the upgrade fund could refill it. So I went back to the door and worked the spear again. The next merman in the crush leaned into the wood, and the spear took it through the eye, and the body collapsed on top of the first one. The merman behind it dragged the corpses off the porch by the ankles, freed up space, and pressed in to take a turn. The cycle had its own ugly rhythm, and after 7 or 8 more spear thrusts, the porch was getting crowded with corpses faster than the swarm could clear them. Then the lighthouse energy bar dipped below half, the azure candlelight visibly dimmed 2 shades on the second floor, and the projected ring of clear air pulled back from 600 meters to 300. The candle's intensity tracked with the energy bar, which made sense and was also a problem, because at this rate the wash was going to dim again at 25%. I sprinted to the control panel, opened the lighthouse page, and tapped the upgrade. 200 wood and 200 stone vanished. The lighthouse went from white 3-star to white 4-star. The energy bar snapped back to 100%, and the brazier on the second floor flared bright again. My grin was short-lived, because the door, which had been worn down to a couple of finger-wide gaps and one good throat-sized hole, finished its repair as part of the upgrade. The good throat-sized hole was gone, and with it my shooting lane. I checked the door from the inside, and 3 or 4 narrow vertical splits remained, the kind a fingertip could fit through but a spearhead could not. Mermen kept hacking on the far side, and the black iron spear sat in my hand with no way through to use it. 16 mermen lay dead on the porch by my count, with 22 on their feet and the Merman King still untouched. I cursed at the ceiling, because if I left the swarm at the door, no amount of upgrades was going to keep the bar full, with each upgrade cost climbing and each refill buying me less ground. Ice crystal shot was the answer, but at point-blank range against the wood, a high-power shot could crack the door from my side, and even a normal shot would chew the lighthouse energy. The last shot had burned 40% of a white 1-star lighthouse's bar in one go, which was nothing to repeat at every wave. The fix was elevation, so I sprinted up the stairs to the brazier walkway, leaned over the railing, and looked down at the swarm from above. The swarm at the door was a tight cluster a meter across, packed so dense that an ice crystal shot dropped from above would catch 4 or 5 mermen in a single detonation. The azure candlelight at my back was high enough to clear my shot. The brazier did not block the line, and the mermen had no idea I was over them. I condensed the ice crystal shot in my palm. This one with 2 points of water-based extraordinary attribute fed into it instead of the prior one. The crystal grew thicker, the cold tracking deeper into my shoulder than before, and I let it drop. The shot lanced down past the brazier, picked the densest knot in the swarm, and went into the head of one merman like a nail into a board. Then it detonated. A pale shockwave bloomed out of the impact in a half-meter ring, and the mermen inside that ring were not bodies anymore, but solid ice statues frozen mid-swing. The shot's core target shattered into glass shards on the wood, and 7 other mermen in the radius froze in place mid-strike, their tatty weapons still raised, their arms locked solid. One swing of my spear from the railing was going to drop every one of them. I almost laughed out loud at the math, because 2 points of water-based extraordinary attribute had taken out half the standing swarm in a single shot, and the survivors had abandoned the door at once. The whole cluster broke and ran for the Merman King in the middle of the beach, gibbering at him in a language that the chat channel had been trying to translate all night with no success. The Merman King turned his ugly head up at me on the railing, and the staff in his hand came up with him. A fireball, the size of a soccer ball, hot, orange, and rolling, erupted from the head of the staff and lanced up at the ice crystal shot I had condensed for the second throw. The crystal and the fireball collided 2 meters above the swarm, and the steam blast carried sideways on the sea wind, the air above the beach turning briefly into a column of fog. "Holy crap," I muttered. The Merman King had a fire-based staff. I looked at my own water-based attribute pool, 6 points left, and admitted that this round was now a wizard's duel. I condensed the next crystal and threw it down. Another fireball met it on the way. Another steam plume. The Merman King's pupils dilated wider, surprised that a tower guardian could fire more than one shot from a staff, since by his frame of reference an extraordinary ability came out of a stick, and he had one stick, and one stick had its limits. "Surprise, Fish King," I muttered as I condensed the third crystal. The Merman King swung the staff up again. The fireball roared out, the two collided, and the third crystal punched through the steam without losing form and hit the Merman King square in the chest. The detonation took him at the sternum, and the Merman King went up in a column of crystallized ice that came down in a small clattering pile of ice slag. The staff bounced off the sand and rolled twice and lay still. I let out the breath I had been holding through the whole exchange, and the remaining mermen scattered for the sea. Mermen on land were slow, and I was not, so I sprinted down the stairs, slammed the door open, and chased them into the open. The slowest were the closest, and the closest dropped one by one with clean spear thrusts to the head, hunt time under my breath. 3 mermen reached the seawater before I could catch them, but I dropped 2 with crystals from the spare pool and froze the last one solid as its feet were entering the surf. 38 mermen lay dead across the beach by the time I finished my circle, with the culprit who had drawn them all there now strolling among them collecting drops. 5 mermen had carried treasure chests in. Of the rest, 13 left wooden treasure chests on the sand by their bodies the way the door visitor had left a coconut bread on the porch yesterday. 18 treasure chests in all, plus the black iron treasure chest the Merman King had dropped where he had stood. The staff lay at the center of the dead pile, polished hot to the touch. I had not even straightened up from collecting the staff when golden subtitles bloomed across the entire night sky. System announcement, the panel called it, and the rest scrolled in light bright enough to cut the mist. Congratulations to Tower Guardian Imsan from 8888. 8888, the first Tower Guardian in the region to wipe out an entire merman tribe in a single defense. All Tower Guardians in the region rewarded a bronze treasure chest, a black iron treasure chest, a wooden treasure chest, and an appraisal technique crystal each. The announcement rolled 3 times in slow-scrolling sky text, in gold bright enough to bleed past the sea mist on every region around mine. The chat channel cracked open at once, and the first message was a single line from a player typing in caps, "Imsan the big boss is amazing." The second was a copy of the first, and the third, the fourth, the 100th, all the same 9 words pasted by every player in the region. By the time I had counted enough corpses to know what was paying me, 90,000 consecutive messages of those 9 words had been posted and pinned to my notification queue, and I closed the channel without opening it because I had work to do. The bodies were the problem first, since 38 mermen rotting on a 4,000 square meter island were not something I wanted to live with for an hour, let alone overnight, and the only way to dispose of the meat at scale was the reef. I dragged the intact bodies one by one off the beach and pitched them into the largest tide pool depression in the reef field, which was the same one I had baited yesterday with the green algae head. A second pit got the ice shards swept in by the shovelful, scooped up in the half of the crab claw shell I had emptied at lunch, and tossed by the bucket. By the time the work was done, I was filthy, my shoulders ached, and the moon was high enough that the azure candlelight's wash had to compete with it. An hour and a half had vanished into the cleanup, and I said phew out loud just for the company of my own voice. I went back inside, drank half a bottle of purified water in one pull, and laid the haul out on the floor. 13 wooden treasure chests, sorted by star into 3 piles. 1 black iron treasure chests, the one the Merman King had dropped. 3 system reward chests from my announcement, the bronze, the black iron, and the wooden. The appraisal technique crystal, the Merman King's staff, and the panel ping that informed me the Tower Guardian Im San also received personal exclusive rewards on top of the regional spread. I tapped to claim. Transcendent Attribute Treasure Chest. 1. Random Purple 1 to 9 star ability crystal. 1. Random Special Equipment. 1. Legend Point +1. I had no idea what legend points did. I tapped the field, the panel offered me no expansion, and I shrugged and let it sit in the corner of my interface as a number with no story yet. The other 3 rewards dropped into the inventory with the chests. I'm rich, I told the room out loud, and rich enough to count it twice. I started with the wooden chest because the wooden chests were the cheap thrill. 7 1-star wooden chests opened in a quick line and paid out, in total, 8 black bread, 5 bottles of purified water, 68 wood, and 41 stone. The 2 stars and 3 stars together gave 9 black bread, 11 bottles of purified water, 142 wood, 71 stone, 1 white 3-star iron pot, 3 water apples, and a set of white 1-star cotton clothes. The iron pot was the find. I had been cooking in a salvaged crab claw half-shell, and a real iron pot was an upgrade 3 tiers above that. The cotton clothes were going to be tonight's pillow. The 2 ordinary black iron treasure chests opened next. The first paid smokeless charcoal blueprint, green 1-star recipe, to teach the crafting station to make a smokeless long-burning charcoal at high heat, and a merman gill, green 5-star special item, effect underwater breathing when attached behind the ear, description that a merman's gill stuck behind the ear gave temporary aquatic breathing. The merman gill was a fortune in a small package, especially for any player with a coral coast or any other waterside land. I packed it carefully and recorded the smokeless charcoal blueprint at the crafting station, with the second blueprint slot of the night. The second black iron treasure chest dropped a farmland blueprint, green 6-star one-time blueprint with the materials pre-loaded, and a bronze light crossbow, blue 1-star ranged weapon, with the penetration effect that the panel cheerfully promised would put an arrow through a shallow sea crab shell. I used the farmland blueprint on the spot, the system delivered farmland, building, green 6-star, 6 planting slots, and I made a mental note to set it up against the edge of the forest tomorrow, far enough from the lighthouse that an invader could not stomp the seedlings in a single rush. The bronze light crossbow had no arrows, and the chat channel for now had no arrow blueprints, but the day I had iron blocks and an arrow recipe the lighthouse's second floor was about to become a sniper's nest. The bronze treasure chest came next, the first bronze chest I had ever held, and I cleared the table for it the way you would clear an altar. I built a small ring of dry branches in the fireplace, lit one as a stand-in incense stick, and asked the heavens to make this chest pay back the weight. The chest opened with a single chime and dropped 1 item. Just 1. Bronze Arrow Rain, Special Equipment Blue 7-star, Effect Triple Shot Bronze Arrow. Evaluation that this was special equipment for arrow towers, and would only mount on a lighthouse with an arrow tower special effect. 1 item, Blue 7-star, useless to me. I muttered that the lighthouse survival system had given me a sniper rifle, and forgot to include the rifle, then remembered that the chat channel had at least 1 player whose starter lighthouse had rolled an arrow tower special effect. I would find them after I finished opening. The Transcendent Attribute Treasure Chest sat last, the rating panel listing it as Black 9-star. I rolled the name on my tongue. Above the standard ladder of white, green, blue, yellow, purple was apparently black, which made no sense as a color tier, so I checked the Deep Sea Mermaid Pearls panel and confirmed the pearl read purple 1-star, with a stated color. The black 9-star rating had no associated visible color in any chest I had opened, so either black was a special rating outside the ladder, the system's way of flagging a category rather than a position, or it was a color above purple that the panel just refused to render. The chest's description called it the kind of chest every overmortal dreams of, with a special effect of plus 50% odds of an extraordinary cultivation method, this time tagged with the note that the bonus was a reward for the brave. The kind of brave who fights a merman king with 7 points of water in the pool. Sure, I clapped my hands together one more time for the deities and opened it. 4 items dropped, 3 extraordinary fruits and 1 extraordinary cultivation method. The first fruit was green 1-star, on consumption a single point of random extraordinary attribute. The second was green 3-star, 3 points random. The third was blue 1-star, 10 points random, 14 points total if the rolls landed where I wanted them to, 14 if they did not. I ate all 3 on the spot, since fruit did not store well in the inventory, and a talent banked was a talent burned. The bodies of the fruits varied, 1 strawberry sized in red, 1 apricot sized in orange, 1 water apple sized in dark blue. The strawberry sized one tasted bitter under the sweetness. The apricot sized one tasted like a fruit I had never had on earth, and the big one tasted like a fruit too rich for my tongue to hold on to. A heat ran through my body, not unpleasant, climbing from my belly to my shoulders and out into my hands, and then settled back into a low hum and was gone. I opened the personal attribute panel. Name Im San, strength over mortal. Talent Gift of Fate. Abilities Ice Crystal Shot and Underwater Breathing. Extraordinary Attributes Water System plus 14, Fire System plus 3, Wood System plus 2, Mystery plus 5, Constitution plus 1, Evaluation a novice over mortal whose first extraordinary attribute had cleared 10 points and was working on 20. 3 new attribute lines. Wood System I had a guess about, plant-themed, probably useful for the farmland. Mystery I had no analog on the standard ladder I had been told about so far, which meant the body had its own extraordinary track. I held up an arm and flexed and decided yes. The muscle felt firmer than it had 10 minutes ago, the tone harder, the surface tighter. I pulled the black iron spear out of the inventory and tested its weight. The black iron spear came up so light in my hand I almost dropped it. The 30-pound shaft was now closer to 20, the same weapon at a third less weight, and I was going to swing it faster, stab with it longer, and hold the brace for the next pit crab grapple without sliding back. The extraordinary constitution paid out, and probably strength and agility worked the same way as their own tracks. Stat panels existed for a reason. I made a note to dig for both. The extraordinary cultivation method sat in the inventory under its own panel. Category cultivation method, black 9-star, effect that on use it formed the cultivation method most suitable to the user. Special effect that the forming pass also forged the user an exclusive profession on the same beat. Evaluation that this was the beginning of an extraordinary family line. 2 black 9-star items in one night. I muttered that black was definitely a special rating, used it, and the system answered with 2 parallel forming notices. Please wait, please wait. I left the prompts running and turned to the 4 items still on the table. The staff first. Fireball staff, extraordinary weapon, green 6-star, effect fireball at 0 out of 3 charges per day. Evaluation that a low-grade fire element staff could throw 3 fireballs daily for any player with a single point of fire-based extraordinary attribute. Useless to me with 3 points of fire and a much higher base attribute pool in water, but at this stage of the game any extraordinary weapon was going to sell for a small fortune. The appraisal technique crystal next. Blue 9-star ability crystal, effect appraisal, no learning requirement. Evaluation a self-deprecating crack from the system that the appraisal of this crystal pegged it as junk. I learned it on the spot. The crystal cracked open, the light went into my forehead, and the technique installed itself in one piece, but the installation came with a wave of pressure that ran across my temples, a low headache that lasted 30 seconds and faded. The information that landed in my head told me appraisal scaled against the target's mental power, and that the mystery attribute resisted appraisal at a priority above mental power. 5 points of mystery in my pool meant I could shrug off 5 points of an opposing appraiser's mental power on top of whatever mental power I had of my own. I would file the trick away. The random purple ability crystal next. Purple 1 to 9-star special item. On use a random purple tier ability crystal. Special effect guaranteed at least purple 4-star. Evaluation that the color purple had a certain panache, and that high-level abilities required at least 100 points of the matching extraordinary attribute, or you would not even have the right to use them. Signed off with a sarcastic little rookie. I used it. The crystal resolved into Starlight Art Crystal, Ability Crystal, Purple 7-star. Effect Starlight Attack and Starlight Defense and Starlight Healing. Learning requirement at least 10 points of Mystery Extraordinary Attribute. Evaluation that the ability rolled offense and defense and healing into one perfect ability and was not recommended below 300 points of Mystery. With the note that under 100 points I would not even have the right to use it. A premonition told me that learning Starlight Art now would split my skull open the way a hand grenade splits a melon. I muttered at the system that I did not believe its 10 point minimum, since the same system had also told me 10 points was not enough to use the thing safely, and packed the Starlight Art Crystal away as future stock. The random special equipment was last. Purple 6-star special item. On use of special equipment between purple 1-star and red 1-star. Evaluation that special equipment was unique and carried a special effect attribute. Red 1-star sat above purple on the ladder. So after purple was red, and the black 9-star rating sat outside the color ladder as a special tag. The math closed neatly. I muttered at the panel that it had better show me something big, and used it. The system delivered Key of Fate, marked unique special equipment, red 1-star growable, effect mystery plus 10%, and mental power plus 10%. Special effect Gate of Fate. Evaluation that fate was everywhere and no one knew what lay behind the Gate of Fate. With the hint that this was a rare, unique growth type equipment that required a soul contract to bind, and the recommendation to use it. Holy moly, I said to the empty lighthouse, my hand around a small golden key that had not been in my palm a second ago, my eyes bouncing between the red 1-star line and the unique tag and the growable tag. Then I caught up to the part of the panel that mentioned a soul contract, blood contract I had done. Blood was a thing I could draw with a knife. A soul I did not know how to access on demand. The Key of Fate answered the question by itself. A thin golden light spilled out of the metal. My Gift of Fate talent flickered in answer. The two glows met in the air above my palm, and a contract that I had not initiated wove itself around the key in the time it took me to inhale. The key disappeared from my hand. The next thought told me where it had gone, somewhere inside my head, kept in a notional space the system called mind. I had no idea whether mind was a real organ or a concept the system was using to humor me. The information about the Gate of Fate landed with the contract. The Key of Fate, when paired with a large pool of mystery extraordinary attribute and waited on through a slow recharge, would summon a Gate of Fate that opened on something I urgently needed. What sat on the far side was unknowable until the door opened. I scratched my head and decided that an item I could not yet use was an item to think about later, then put the Key of Fate away in the mind compartment and turned to the channel. The bronze light crossbow had no arrows. The fireball staff was a green 6-star fire element weapon useless to me. The bronze arrow rain was a blue 7-star equipment mount that required a lighthouse with an arrow tower special effect. The merman gill was green 5-star underwater breathing for any player without a water-based attribute. 4 products, 1 waking market of 90,000 board buyers. I opened the chat channel for trade. I posted 3 of the 4 items, the fireball staff and the bronze arrow rain and the merman gill, with the panels attached, and within seconds my inbox flooded with the same chorus of envious and jealous messages that the announcement had triggered earlier, plus a much larger quantity of patronage requests that the system politely filtered. I sorted for green tier and above and ended up with about 100 genuine bids, of which one of the first I opened tried to bait me with a photo of a green 3-star dagger placed on a bare thigh. I closed it without comment and moved on. Although I did silently save the photo to the inventory's hidden folder for no particular reason a self-respecting person could defend. The bronze arrow rain was the first item to clear. A player named Jin Berry had rolled the arrow tower special effect on a starter lighthouse, and his trade offer was a clean list of every green and blue item in his backpack, with the line "take whatever you want." I asked him for his lighthouse panel to confirm, and the panel came back white 4-star with a green candlelight main effect and an arrow tower special effect, the evaluation noting that each arrow rain volley cost 1% of lighthouse energy. Confirmed. I'd picked the 2 best items from his list, the mixed bait at green 4-star and the incomplete sinking iron spear at blue 3-star, and the trade closed. The mixed bait was a fishing pit upgrade over the green algae head, with the panel cheerfully not telling me what it would attract. The incomplete sinking iron spear was blue 3-star with effects penetration and heaviness, the description noting that a complete version would have been blue 8-star, a clean replacement for the black iron spear, slightly down on weight thanks to the new constitution attribute, ready to drop a shallow sea crab's back shell on first impact. The black iron spear went into the corner as a backup. The fireball staff cleared next. A player named Jin Gyo Lim, the same handle the system had announced for 3rd place on the first day's kill leaderboard, the same handle I had spotted on yesterday's seal and upgrade list, came in with a single green 8-star item, a green cloud headband extraordinary equipment, description an extraordinary headpiece woven from the tail feathers of a green bird. The headband was 2 tiers below the staff on paper, but the fireball staff was a flashy trump card, and the headband added straight mental power, which I now knew was the resistance stat that fed appraisal and probably half a dozen other tricks I did not yet have. I asked him whether he had any arrow blueprints in his backpack, and he told me a friend of his had a black iron arrow blueprint that needed iron blocks to craft. I told him I would call him the day I had iron blocks. We added each other as friends, and the trade closed. The merman gill was the last, and the field for it was thinner. One player had a green 6-star long saber to offer, and a long saber was not a weapon I needed, so I passed. A second player named Wang Peng offered a list of 6 items, 4 green and 2 blue, drawn from his Coral Coast Sealand. I opened it and skimmed. The blue ones were the prize. Alluring sound shell, special item, blue 3-star, effect allurement, description a sound shell that recorded the alluring voice of a low-grade mermaid and on use charmed every living thing within 10 meters. Purple coral, blue 2-star, effect purifies water quality and absorbs toxins. Description a rarer strain of coral that could pull poisons out of seawater. The alluring sound shell would have suited Jim Berry's arrow tower better, since a tower guardian under the shell's own effect would be just as charmed as the enemy. But the purple coral would slot directly into my own coral area, and unlike the scarlet coral I had left in the seabed, it was harvestable on landing. I asked Wang Peng whether he was sure about the coral, and he laughed back that his coral area was full of purple coral, but the rest of it sat in deep water he did not yet dare to dive. The early Coral Coast benefit, paid out and complaining about itself. I closed the trade with the coral in hand and the merman gill gone, and the chat channel finally quieted. Then I remembered the toilet paper. I checked the inventory. The merman defense and the chest opening run had eaten my entire stock at the chat channel sale. 2,470 pieces of wood and 3,289 pieces of stone now sat in the bank. The morning's trades and the system rewards stacked together. I had nothing to sell at the trade window because there was no trade window yet. The chat channel scrolled to confirm that no other player had rolled a toilet paper blueprint, which meant my monopoly held one more day. I queued every last piece of wood into the crafting station, as toilet paper, 24,700 packs, sitting in the slow queue, and I let the station tick through the night. I lay down on the exquisite single bed and used the cotton clothes as a pillow because the bed had not come with one, the nighttime air not yet cold enough to need a blanket, and I closed my eyes on a lighthouse that smelled like fish and crab and faintly of the lemon soft scent of fresh toilet paper. Past 10 in the evening, the system pinged. Tomorrow's tide would come early, the announcement said. I told the system I had heard it and went under. I slept dreamless and woke to sunlight cutting straight across my face from a window I had not closed all the way. I sat up, yawned, drank from a bottle of purified water, splashed a palmful across my face, and felt the day land. 6:30 in the morning by the panel clock. Today's weather, sunny and breezy. Today's weather effect, rare. After the tide receded on my sealand, the treasure chests I obtained had a chance to climb 1-star rank above the rolled rating. I muttered that the system finally liked me, and then at 7 exactly the rest of the morning, panels rolled in at once, telling me the tide was half an hour from receding, and that tower guardians who had survived to the 3rd day were being rewarded with the next round of unlocks. The forging station was deploying, the trading system was opening, import facilities were deploying. The 3 deployments confirmed successful, one after another in the same patient cadence the system used for everything important. A forging station materialized against the wall by the crafting station, an iron anvil and a low square hearth side by side, big enough that the room got tight. A port panel slid open in the system interface, and a glance through the window showed a wooden footbridge running out from the left side of the lighthouse, 1 meter wide and 10 meters long, extending 2 meters past the edge of the sealand into the water. The port. The dirt road that connected the lighthouse to it had not been there yesterday. I opened the trading system panel first. 2 pages, regional trade and world trade. World trade was grayed out. Locked. Of course it was. Regional trade was open. Every tower guardian had a personal shop with 10 listing slots a day, unlimited stacking inside any one slot. Fixed prices set by the owner, with no middleman fee. I liked the no middleman fee. I dumped all 24,700 packs of toilet paper into one slot at 10 wood per pack and confirmed the listing. By the time I had stood up, the chat channel had 100 posts about the shop already. The port page came up next. Port, Sealand building, white 1-star, no effect. Evaluation, a dilapidated port that no one would willingly come trade at. Upgrade cost 0 out of 100 wood. Hint that the port was an essential building because maritime merchants would only visit if the port was decent and because the port was also where a tower guardian could leave the sealand to explore. Lighthouse gold coins finally had a story. I picked up a piece of black bread and half a bottle of water as breakfast and walked outside, chewing as I went. The forging station I would learn at the next quiet hour. The toilet paper was already on the trade window. The port deserved a personal inspection. The port was a creaking line of warped planks lashed together by frayed rope, the worst piece of carpentry on a sealand full of warped wood. I stepped onto it and the timbers complained at every step. I made it to the end without going through, looked back at the lighthouse from 2 meters out over open water, and saw my whole island the way a sailing ship would see it on approach. Small, sharp, white-rimmed, a flame-burning blue at the crown. A flag worth coming to or worth avoiding depending on the captain. I muttered that I would upgrade the port the moment the tide receded. A chime from the panel told me the tide was already going. I jogged back along the bridge and stepped onto the beach as the seawater pulled back from my feet. The sand was littered with little crabs scurrying for cover, thumb-sized, and behind them the wood and stone of the morning gather. An ecosystem was building on my sealand, slow but visible, and I made a note to leave the small marine life alone where I could, since renewable food on tap beat one good meal any day. I started the loop from the port and worked outward to the coral area, the beach giving up its standard tribute of wood and stone, the coral area's rim 10 meters past the last sand. At the boundary I stopped, because something in the coral area was a great deal bigger than the small marine life I had been content with yesterday. A mantis shrimp 2 meters long was crouched in the shallows of the coral area, glossy and segmented like the giant mantis shrimp I had killed yesterday, but at 4 times the body length, every panel of its armor flashing in a slow rotation through the entire visible spectrum. Blues, into reds, into greens, into yellows, the way an oil slick moves under sun. A rainbow mantis shrimp. It was happily working over the corpse of a shallow sea crab the size of yesterday's juvenile, claws clicking as it cracked the shell open in steady wet cracks. Speechless was the right word. The shallow sea crab was the apex predator I had been ranking my survival against this whole time, and a rainbow mantis shrimp was eating one for breakfast like a snack. On land, a mantis shrimp's pace would not match mine. In the water, I would not last a second. The only equalizer was Ice Crystal Shot, and even Ice Crystal Shot was going to be a gamble against an attribute pool I did not know yet. I tapped the corner of the projection, and the new appraisal technique fired across the gap. The crystal of mental focus traveled out across the water, brushed the mantis shrimp spectrum-shifting carapace, and resolved with a fast double chime. Detecting target mystery extraordinary attribute? None. Appraisal successful with 200% appraisal effect, the panel said. The data flooded in. Rainbow green armored shrimp. Strength ordinary, talent rapid flash, abilities hard shell and ambush, extraordinary attributes water system +4 and metal system +7, evaluation a newly mature sea beast whose strength was rated ordinary but whose single punch was strong enough to send me to meet my great-grandmother. Over appraisal evaluation, the rainbow green armored shrimp's carapace carried the hard shell attribute and was an excellent material for crafting light armor. I rolled the name in my head. Rainbow green armored shrimp. Strength ordinary, but a punch hard enough to splinter glass. I remembered all at once the Earth zoology trivia about mantis shrimp, the dactyl club that struck at cavitation speeds with enough force to crack aquarium glass and break a finger through a wire mesh. And I admitted the shallow sea crab below the shrimp had earned its breakfast spot honestly. Underestimating a mantis shrimp at any size was a mistake the same crab had paid for with its life. I held my ground at the boundary and stared at the rainbow body cracking the shell. The newbie benefit period had 2.5 days left in it. The rainbow green armored shrimp could not attack me unprovoked. As long as I did not step into the water or throw a crystal, the shrimp was a colorful problem on display, not a fight. The rainbow mantis shrimp was still working over the shallow sea crab's corpse in the coral area shallows, claws cracking the shell open with steady wet snaps, and I held my position at the boundary and weighed the math. An ice crystal shot would put it down without my needing to wade in, but before I committed I scanned the coral for what else might be sitting in the same waters, and the answer sat 2 meters in front of the shrimp. A black iron treasure chest perched on a flat lobe of coral, like it had been set down on a coffee table. A black iron chest, I muttered, and the shrimp was no longer optional. I lowered myself into the water at the rim, slow and quiet, the deep-sea mermaid pearl filling my chest with air as cleanly as a door opening. The water-based attribute, or the pearl, possibly both, carried me through the water with almost no wake, and I closed to 3 meters off the shrimp's tail and stopped, because 3 meters was as close as I wanted to get to a rainbow mantis shrimp's blind spot. I cupped my palm and started condensing, the water around my hand iced over in slow rings, the cold bleeding out into the current, and the shrimp predictably felt it, its body going still for a beat as the spectrum stopped rotating across its plates, and the long head began to swing toward me at a deliberate angle. Bad omen. The crystal was not yet at full charge, and I could not wait, so I poured 5 points of water into the shot in a single fast push and threw. The crystal lanced out, leaving a trail of fine ice shards in suspension behind it, an effect I had not seen on the dry air shots. The seawater itself contributing to the kill the moment the cold touched it. The shrimp's entire body locked solid with a hard splintering crack, the colors guttering out of its carapace to a uniform pale frost, and the iced body drifted slowly upward toward the surface. Too much, I muttered. 5 points of water on a target that size, and the whole creature was a popsicle. But then I caught movement inside the ice, the shrimp's eyes tracking sideways, the body still alive in the heart of the freeze. I fired the appraisal technique on the floating body, and the panel came back with the answer I had been missing. Water system +4. Same attribute resistance, I thought. A creature with its own water pool could shrug a fraction of an ice crystal shot, the cold biting less than it would on a dry target. Even if same attribute did not cancel, it had clearly taken a piece off the damage. Useful intel free of charge, and the shrimp was still pinned in the ice and going nowhere. I broke the surface, planted both hands against the floating ice block, and shoved it toward the shore until it grounded on sand. Up close, I could see what I had not seen from the water. The block was not solid ice, but an icy slush that the shrimp's own water system attribute had kept from setting hard, which was why the body was still alive inside. I pulled the sinking iron spear out of the inventory, a hair lighter than yesterday with the new constitution point in my pool, and aimed for the head through the ice. A blue 3-star weapon for a rainbow mantis shrimp's funeral, I thought, the kind of send-off this one had not earned, and drove the spearhead down. The sinking iron spear cut through the ice layer like a knife through warm butter, then punched into the head, and the point came out clean on the far side. The shrimp went still inside its block at once. 1 point of constitution had clearly doubled my swing weight, the blue tier weapon doing its own heavy lifting and the new strength the missing third of the equation. I dragged the spear free, packed the iced body and slid back into the water for the chest. The black iron treasure chest came off the coral with no resistance, and the wreckage of the shallow sea crab the shrimp had been eating was already drawing a small crowd of fish and crabs to the open meat. I packed the chest and turned to find a planting spot for the purple coral I had traded from Wang Peng the night before. The coral area was already stained with the brick red of the scarlet coral seedling, and since I had no idea whether two strains of coral would compete or settle in side by side, I picked a clean patch of seabed well clear of the scarlet stalk, and set the purple coral down. The trade had come with the note that purple coral was alive and would propagate, the kind of asset that paid better left to grow. A flicker of dark spines on a lower coral caught my eye, and I kicked down for a closer look. 3 sea urchins fastened to a coral fan, algae eaters, which was good, since algae grazers kept the coral clean and were not a starfish that would have eaten the polyps and ruined the whole bed. Trivia I had picked up off old aquarium documentaries, paying out a Sealand away. The coral area gave me 3 pearl shells and a glimpse of a green 3-star sea fish I could not pin down in open water, flicking through the coral too fast for an empty-handed swimmer to catch. A spearfish set up at the rim could have closed the gap, but I was already in deeper than I wanted to go. The take-home was clear. The coral area paid its resources mostly in marine product, treasure chests aside. I climbed out, shook the water off, and turned for the reef area, the leg I had been waiting for. 20-some merman bodies had been dumped in those pits last night, and the chat channel had been chewing on what kind of sea beast count that volume of free meat would draw. I picked the tallest reef on the field, climbed to its crown, and looked down. 8 sea beasts visible in the open, 3 shallow sea crabs piled into a pit eating something I could not see. 2 more solo crabs tucked under reef overhangs, 2 mantis shrimp side by side, and a new long sleek fish-coated shape I had not seen before. 8 on the visible count with however many more hidden in dark seams, and hauling merman corpses for an hour and a half last night had paid back in spades. 8 sea beasts on the open count should pay 5 or 6 chests, give or take, since not every beast carried a chest and not every chest carried a guard. The only regret was the lack of a working refrigerator for the haul, I muttered, and dropped off the reef. I worked the seams slow and careful, checking every dark corner for ambush. The spear set in a guard the chat channel had drilled into everyone overnight. A puddle ahead caught my eye and I rerouted around it on instinct, then pulled up short on the next bend, because something on the sand at my feet was neither coral nor stone. A conch the color of bullion, heavy in my palm. The panel resolved into golden conch, special item, blue 3-star, effect summon a ship, description a conch that could summon a ship of unknown type ranging from a maritime merchant to a pirate ship, to a ghost ship. The rating capped at twice the conch's own. Real gold by weight, blue 3-star to boot. I stood grinning, because a ship of unknown allegiance was still a ship. A few minutes later I came up over a low rise and looked down on a sword-nosed fish, 3 meters of body stranded in a tide pool a meter deep. The nose alone half a meter of polished sword bone twitching as the water dropped around it. I almost felt sorry for it. I fired the appraisal technique on principle, and the panel returned sword-nosed fish, strength ordinary, talent none, ability sprint and stamina burst, water system +6, sword system +3, metal system +1. The overappraisal was the prize, telling me the sword bone could be crafted into an overmortal tier water sword, one of the favorite weapons of any novice water system overmortal. Free dinner with the side of a future melee answer to anything the spear could not reach. The universe was running a sale. I lined the spear up behind the fish, told that its problem was greed, since a fish 3 meters long had clearly come chasing a meal of its own, and got stuck, and drove the point through the head. The sinking iron spear punched clean through, and the body went into a thrashing fit that rattled the pit walls hard enough to ring a dinner bell across the reef field. Sure enough, a shallow sea crab was already creeping over the rim. I condensed a 1-point ice crystal shot since I had been burning the pool too fast, waited for the shallow sea crab to clear the rim, and dropped it. The crystal hit the back shell and the whole crab went into ice in a single half-breath, locked solid in mid-step. Past 10 points of water-based attribute, the ice crystal shot had clearly grown teeth on the side, the cold biting harder and faster than it had at the start of the week. A point spent at 10 not the same as a point spent at 1. Intel the documentation had not bothered to write down, but the body taught fast. The sword-nosed fish had stopped moving. I climbed into the pit, set the spear butt against the head as a brace, and slammed the edge across the joint at the bridge of the nose. The sword bone coming off in one piece, a half-meter blade with a hilt bone running through the meat where I had cut. The fish's anatomy had grown the sword and the handle as one piece, which was why the overappraisal had cleared it for an overmortal grade weapon. I packed the sword nose, packed the wooden treasure chest the system pinged into the corpse on death, packed the iced crab on top, and left the rest of the fish meat as bait for whatever was working the field today. 4 inventory slots left. I kept moving, picking up wood as I went. The reef gave up a wooden treasure chest sitting unguarded a few bends later, and then I came over the rim of the largest reef pit on the field, the one I had baited the day before, and stopped to look down. 3 shallow sea crabs were jammed against each other in the bottom, packed so tight that the 8 legs and 6 claws had locked into a knot the pit's geometry had cooked up for them. My goodness, I muttered, who showed up to a fight folded together like laundry, and I peered into the gap between their bodies, but the prize was buried under the pile. I knocked on the top crab with the spear, and the whole knot squirmed without going anywhere. I lined up a 2-point ice crystal shot and dropped it between the 2 closest crabs, and the detonation cracked the pile in half. 2 crabs reduced to ice shards on the spot, the third taking a chunk of its own claws as collateral. The third crab's belly had been pressed against the pit floor, and when the corpses crumbled away from it, I finally saw what they had been sitting on. A huge loss. A massive loss, I said out loud, because under the pile were 4 red flower rasboras and the scattered remains of more rasboras the shallow sea crabs had been working through. The crabs had piled in for a spirit fish feast. The 3 I had just killed, only the lucky ones who got there first, and I had walked in on the second course. Of the 4 rasboras in the pit, 2 were already half-eaten, the other 2 in the center of the pile untouched and shielded by the crab bodies above them. I jumped down, ran the spear through the surviving third crab for the principle of the thing, and told the dead crab in the most pleasant voice I could find that I had avenged the rasboras, and that when it crossed over it should pass the message to its friends to come visit me, all of them. A spirit fish that handed out extraordinary attribute on consumption had been one of my favorite finds of the week, and a chance to multiply it by 4 had nearly slipped through my fingers because 3 crabs had piled in to eat my groceries. I pried the dead crab's shell open with the spear, ladled in fresh seawater from the pit floor, dropped the 2 live rasboras into the crab shell tank, and packed the 2 dead rasboras for the table even though I doubted their meat would still carry the bonus. The tank went to a sheltered hollow on the cleared sand near the lighthouse. A smashed crab claw dropped in as a parting meal, the rasboras ignoring me and going straight for the crab. Eat well, I told them, And get fat for me because the day I roasted you was the day I bought a stat point. A quick chew and spit test back at the pit on the 2 mangled rasboras confirmed that whatever quality had given the species its spiritfish bonus died with the head, the bite-damaged meat tasting normal. 5 sea beasts down, 3 visible to go, the rest of the afternoon to find them. I crept around the next reef bend on a hunch and saw a wooden treasure chest sitting in the open and a shallow sea crab next to it that was missing. One of its great claws, the crab having clearly lost a fight to one of the other shallow sea crabs over food. A half-crippled crab was an easy kill. The spear came up as a formality, and then the crab took one look at me, dropped the food it had been gnawing on, and ran. I stood there with the spear cocked, staring at the patch of sand the crab had bolted across. A guardian beast did not necessarily have to defend its chest to the death. The system was quietly teaching me, and could abandon the post and flee if it knew the matchup was a loss. The intelligence ladder on these sea beasts ran higher than I had assumed. I packed the unguarded chest and moved on. The next bend gave me a mantis shrimp behind a reef, and a giant carnivorous clam half open in the next pit over. The clam's appraisal panel called it a giant carnivorous clam. Strength ordinary, talent none. Ability stony stone system +5. Water system +3. The over-appraisal said the shell was hard enough to shrug off green tier weapons and could only be processed after softening with an acidic liquid. An interesting bit of crafting trivia I did not have an acid for. A sit-and-wait predator that opened its shell to bait prey close. The answer was to never get inside the bite radius. I dropped a 1-point ice crystal shot into the gape, and the clam's whole body iced into a frozen meat pack in one breath. The shells locked open by the freeze. I walked up, knocked on the open shell, found it rock hard and grinned, because the 2 shells were going to make excellent temporary water reservoirs. I packed the whole clam intact. I worked the rest of the reef field in a slow loop and tallied the take. 14 sea beasts spotted across the sweep, 5 treasure chests collected, 4 wooden and 1 black iron, on top of the coral area's black iron. The day's running list was 2 black iron treasure chests, 4 wooden treasure chests, 3 pearl shells, 83 pieces of wood, 27 stones, 1 giant carnivorous clam, 1 sword nose, 2 red flower rasboras, and the golden conch as the prize line item. The sea land was paying me back in real coin. I picked the red flower rasbora I had reserved for lunch out of the crab shell tank on my way past, cleaned it on the wooden table outside, and brought it in to roast on the fireplace. The day's harvest came in next. The clam shells and the sword bone dropped outside since the room was too tight. The rest set out in clean piles on the floor. I queued the morning's traded wood at the crafting station as toilet paper, 24,843 pieces in the hopper. A massive profit, the kind of margin you only got on the first day a new product hit a starving market. I checked the chest panels first, because the rare weather effect had promised a chance of an upgraded star rank on every chest looted. The 4 wooden chests rolled at white 3-star, 2 at 5-star, and 1 at 8-star, an 8-star wooden being the highest grade I had seen yet. The 3-star wooden gave 23 wood, 12 stone, 3 bottles of purified water, standard baseline. The 2 prefixed 5-stars paid out an iron wooden treasure chest with 10 iron blocks, and a sea salt wooden treasure chest with a kilogram of sea salt, salt and iron blocks both stockpiling. The 8-star had a new prefix, blueprint wooden treasure chest. The panel saying flatly that the chest was guaranteed to drop a blueprint capped at green 8-star. I cracked it. The chest paid out moon healing potion blueprint, green 3-star plus 10 pieces of moonlight grass. A healing potion blueprint at green 3-star was a heavyweight find, and I grinned and dropped the blueprint into the crafting station's recess. The moon healing potion read as a green 3-star medicine in pill form. Effect treats injuries and minor ailments. The crafting requirement: a single piece of moonlight grass, moonlight flower, or moon mushroom, the kind of forgiving recipe that meant the potion would never be hard to make. The description called it the work of an outstanding alchemist. A small pill easy to carry. The medicinal effect strong enough to treat wounds and ease cold and fever symptoms. The moonlight grass itself appraised as a white 3-star herb common to the point of being below the cut for an herbalist's catalog, except that the moon healing potion had given it a job. Common was good, and meant the supply chain would hold. Better than toilet paper as a product line, but the 10 grass blades in my inventory had no roots, so transplanting them was a coin flip. I dropped 1 moonlight grass into the crafting station and started a small pill on the queue. That left the 2 black iron treasure chests. The first carried a ship black iron treasure chest prefix, green 9-star, effect a 100% drop of a ship, the description noting that ships were essential gear for any tower guardian leaving the sea land, and that the port had to be upgraded to white 9-star before basic shipbuilding even unlocked. A guaranteed ship on day 3. I cracked it. The chest dropped a light water iron speedboat, blue 6-star effect, light and fast travel. Description: a hull made of light water iron, exceptionally light without losing structural integrity, very fast on the water, same ore as the shield. The system pinged in the same breath, detecting the ship and beginning automatic transfer to the port, the transfer completing in seconds. I crossed to the window in 2 strides and looked out. The ship was already docked at the first slip, 10 meters end to end, 2 meters of freeboard above the waterline and another meter under the keel. The color the greenish iron of light water iron, slick and unmarked, a polished hull straight out of the box. My goodness, I muttered, a ship that size, could I even operate the thing solo? The second black iron chest was plain green 3-star and dropped an iron guard longsword at green 3-star, ordinary, the panel noting it paired well with a shield. A longsword and the light water iron shield together made a balanced loadout for the day. The spear was not the answer. I packed it and called the morning's haul closed. I pulled the roasted red flower raspborer off the fire, sprinkled a pinch of sea salt across it, and ate. The flesh was clean and sweet under the salt, 3 to 4 pounds going down in a long pull, and the new constitution attribute kept me hungry past the point where a normal stomach would have given up. The bonus on the meat did not trigger, the panel staying silent on the extraordinary attribute payout, which was the way the spirit fish mechanic ran. 10 fish for a guaranteed point and any single fish a long shot. Even without the bonus, the meat was a good lunch, and I drained a bottle of purified water in one long pull at the back of it. I sat back and remembered I had not used the gift of fate yet, and the daily charge would expire if I let it. I activated it. The panel opened on Gift of Fate has chosen Overmortal Introductory Handbook. Cost none. My eyes lit up. A book of knowledge handed over for free by a talent that had given me 10 days of life the day before. This was the kind of return rate that made me want to bow at the panel. I confirmed the gift, and a slim hardcover materialized in my hand, thin enough that I could tell at a glance there were only a few pages inside. I opened it on the table. The first page, compiled by the Overmortal Path Scholar Path, laid out the requirements for becoming an Overmortal in 3 steps. First, that one had to possess at least 1 extraordinary attribute as the fuel for any ability. Second, that the attribute had to reach 10 points to earn the formal title of Novice Overmortal. And third, that a full Overmortal also had to possess at least 1 extraordinary ability before the title held up under scrutiny. The taxonomy broke down across 4 tiers, the 5 common elementals fire, water, earth, metal, and wood being the basic anchors. Then a set of abnormal elementals like wind and ice, and dark and light and thunder at the same tier but with on average more powerful abilities. Then the 3 physical attributes, overmortal strength, overmortal constitution, and overmortal agility on the body's not spells track. The author noting in a snide aside that scholars look down on these so-called overmortal brutes because reasoning did not work on them. Last and rarest, the special attributes, mystery, spirit, space-time, knowledge, and the like, the kind of attribute that put an overmortal in a category of 1. Mystery I had, 5 points of it in my pool already, and I turned over for page 2. Page 2 laid out the paths to improvement. First, raise the extraordinary attribute pool by eating extraordinary creatures, harvesting natural treasures, or equipping items with attribute boosts. The last category coming with the asterisk that the boost was temporary unless the item could recognize a master and bind. And I thought of the key of fate sitting in my mind compartment, and conceded the point. Second, acquire abilities, which broke into 3 subpaths, 1 being to buy ability crystals expensively but simply, 2 being to pick up what the prior generations had left behind, from family inheritances to roadside flea markets to ruins, and 3 being to enroll in an overmortal academy, the easiest method for anyone with talent and the hardest method for anyone without it. A footnote at the bottom was the giveaway. The author Loen Xian, identifying herself as a mentor at Lihua Academy and inviting any reader who enrolled with this handbook in hand to come find their mentor. An advertisement, dressed in the prim voice of a scholar, with a referral system clearly in play. Page 3 was a single paragraph thanking the reader for their attention and instructing them to purchase the Overmortal Advancement Handbook to unlock the rest of the content. I sighed at the line because the handbook had teased an entire library and delivered 2 pages of substance and 1 page of sales pitch. 3 pages cover to cover, and the most important book on the island was a marketing pamphlet. I decided to share it, content this thin would be petty to hoard, and giving it away free would have set the wrong precedent, so I posted the handbook on the personal shop window at a flat fee of 10 wood or stone per viewer, the price low enough that nobody would skip. While I set the listing, I checked the regional population counter, 93,218. 6,782 players gone in 3 days, more than 2,000 a day on average. The number set heavier than I wanted. Across all regions worldwide, it worked out to hundreds of millions, and Lighthouse Survival had earned the survival in its name. I shook the math off and clicked the listing live. The chat channel detonated, the usual chorus of holy molies and big shot calls, players spamming +1 and +2 and +14k 785 at each other to crowd the channel. The toll cleared faster than I expected. 674,110 pieces of wood landed in my inventory at once, with 257,940 stones in the trailing column. I was rich, I said out loud just to hear it land in the empty room. Basic materials no longer a constraint by any honest definition. The lighthouse, the sea land, and the port could all take rolling upgrades on the current pile. I walked to the control panel and opened the lighthouse page. White 3-star, energy at 78%. Upgrading would refill the bar to full, but I had no energy stone of any kind to recharge outside of an upgrade. And with the newbie benefit period still on the clock, I would not need to top off anytime soon. So I held the lighthouse upgrade until I had eyes on an energy supply. The Sealand page was the place to spend the morning. Tidal Island set at white 2-star with the upgrade priced at 2,000 stones, a piece of cake on the new pile. I tapped upgrade and rolled the ladder in a single sustained burn. 3-star to 4-star to 5-star to 6-star to 7-star to 8-star to 9-star. The whole climb a rolling stream of confirmations as 35,000 stones evaporated into the upgrade fund, and the area panel ticked up at every step. The Sealand settled at white 9-star with the requirement for the next jump listed as 1 island heart, no quantity of raw material attached, a new term and a new prerequisite that I noted before closing the page. The tidal island now ran 12,000 square meters, 4 times the area I had started with tidal effect doubled and coral coast as the running special effects. An island heart was the next gate, and I had no idea what one was or where to find one, but the system was running its quiet pacing and would tell me when the moment came. The port came next. White 1-star, upgrade 0 of 100 wood. I rolled the ladder the same way, the port topping out at white 9-star with the next upgrade gated behind 10,000 wood, 1,000 stone, and the Sealand reaching green 1-star. The Sealand was capped on the island heart, the port on the Sealand, the chained progression dialed in to the dot. The new port had spread into 9 slips along a single dock, 9 wooden bridges side by side, the light water iron speedboat already moored in the first, the dilapidated footbridge replaced with a 2-meter wide deck with railing and proper carpentry. I stepped outside, walked the new boundary of Tidal Island, and ran a short spear drill in the cleared sand near the lighthouse. Stab, sweep, smash. The sinking iron spear came up at the lighter weight the Constitution attribute had bought me, the kind of margin I wanted in a real fight, and an hour of drill burned a sweat across my back before I went inside to drink water. The panel pinged that the next low tide was 30 minutes off, so I went down to the docks to talk to the ship spirit while the toilet paper queue ran. The wooden bridge no longer creaked under my feet. I climbed onto the light water iron speedboat from the first slip and walked the hull, a sleek piece of carpentry up close, a streamlined cabin amidships with 2 doors and a small cockpit at the bow. I stepped into the cockpit. Steering wheel, throttle controls, a black display screen above the dashboard, 2 large buttons in the panel marked autopilot and start ship, the cleanest dashboard I had ever seen on a vessel. I pressed start ship, the display lit up at once, a soft cool light, and a young woman's voice rolled out of the speakers, polite and pleased, telling me she was the ship spirit of the lightwater iron speedboat, and that it was an honor to serve me, Captain. I told her this was more advanced than anything on Earth and asked her what a ship spirit even was. She answered that a ship spirit was the soul of a ship, born the moment a shipwright successfully completed a hull, and that a ship without one could not safely travel the mist sea because a ship spirit kept the port logged and could navigate home through any fog, while a ship without one relied on the captain's skill, which was code for a much worse outcome. I looked out at the wall of fog past the breakwater and asked her whether the whole ocean was called the Mist Sea and whether something lived inside it. She told me that nobody knew the original name of the sea, that the name Mist Sea had been earned by the fog, that the fog could only be dispelled by special means, and that as for what lived inside the fog, she apologized, but she had only been born today and had no answer to that. The knowledge of the Mist Sea being something a ship spirit was born knowing the way humans were born knowing how to breathe. I asked her whether she could take me out to sea now, and she told me politely that I did not have a lamp ready for her hull, and that without one the mist would swallow her in a heartbeat. I pointed out that the lamps I had seen on chat channel screenshots dispelled only 3 meters of mist, and she corrected me, explaining that a lamp mounted on a ship dispelled 3 meters centered on the hull, rather than on the carrier, which made the lamp the ship's own bubble and a 10-meter hull with a 3-meter ring, an effectively 16-meter ship for sea mist evasion. Lamps were for ships, not for people. The lighthouse's candlelight worked on the same principle, the radius rated against the source, and the engineering of the Mist Sea suddenly had a logic I could trace. I kept the conversation running through a few more basic questions until the tide pinged me out, and on my way off the deck I told her I would land on a real name for her by tomorrow morning, since calling her ship spirit forever was a non-starter. The tide began to recede as I stepped off the deck. The new Sealand was 12,000 square meters, and the beach was a longer walk than yesterday, and I decided to skip wood and stone collection on this pass, since the toilet paper trade had made basic resources irrelevant on volume. I jogged down to the beach first because the beach was the simplest leg, and yes, the new boundary still spawned wood and stones along the strand the same way the old one had. I cleared the beach in 15 minutes without finding a single chest, and turned for the coral area which had expanded outward into a long ring around the edge of the beach, deeper and richer than yesterday. The water closed over me and the pearl held its end. A pearl shell came up in the first minute, palm-sized, packed in. More marine life had moved in. The coral area now thick with lobsters, crabs, and mantis shrimp of normal small sizes. A healthy reef in miniature. A black iron treasure chest sat unguarded on the seabed a few minutes in, packed without ceremony. And then around the bend at the far edge of the sea land, I saw a bronze treasure chest sitting alone at the boundary between my own land and the deep water past it. Bronze treasure chest, I muttered, and my pulse jumped. The first bronze treasure chest I had ever seen in the wild, sitting alone with no guardian beast in sight. I kicked toward it and stopped a body length out, because a faint click had carried through the water to my ears, and I could not tell where it had come from. I scanned the area in a slow turn. No sea beasts in the water nearby, nothing in the coral above me, nothing in the sand below. A second click came a few seconds later, then a third, and I held my position and waited. Then the sky lit up. Golden subtitles spread across the cloud cover. The system announcement chimed cutting through the water as cleanly as if I had been on land, congratulating Tower Guardian Gerald from Region 765. 432 for being the second player in any region to wipe out an entire merman tribe in a single defense, awarding every Tower Guardian in his region a black iron treasure chest, a wooden treasure chest, and an appraisal technique crystal. 3 slow rolls of gold text bright enough to cut the mist. I noted the name, Gerald, the second place ribbon, the first still mine, then turned back to the bronze treasure chest because the click had come a fourth time, and this time I had seen the lid lift a fraction of a centimeter and close again. A bronze treasure chest that breathed. The chat channel and 100 old games had taught me what this meant. A treasure chest monster. The classic dungeon crawler trap. A creature in disguise that snapped its jaws shut on the first hand to reach for the lid. I fired the appraisal technique at it. The panel resolved into bronze treasure chest monster, strength over mortal, talent treasure space abilities disguise and biting. Wood system +4, and metal system +13. The evaluation was the system at its most arch, telling me that what looked like a bronze treasure chest was a monster wearing a chest costume, and that the rewards for killing one were richer than opening an honest bronze. The over-appraisal added that the bronze treasure chest monster was extremely poorly suited to seawater, that the creature felt like it was suffocating underwater, and that the moment it opened its jaws was the moment to stab. The system had practically signed the kill order. Strength over mortal would have been a serious matchup on dry land where the creature had evolved to ambush dungeon runners. But underwater with the pearl in my chest and a sinking iron spear in my hand, the matchup flipped. I pulled the spear out and waited, the click coming every 2 minutes by my count, the lid lifting just enough to admit a half-breath then snapping shut. After 2 cycles, I lined the spear up on the seam and waited for the next opening. The lid lifted. I drove the sinking iron spear into the gap with a single hard stab, the shaft sliding deep into the open jaw and lodging at the back of its throat, the head propped open by the iron. The disguise dropped at once, the wooden veneer split, a row of long curved fangs erupting around the rim, a fleshy tongue lashing out and wrapping around the spear shaft to drag it loose. I grabbed the butt with both hands and shoved deeper instead of pulling back, the water giving my push the speed it needed. The creature was already at a disadvantage in seawater, and my own water-based attribute carried me through the water the way the creature could not move at all. I twisted the spear inside the chest, the shaft turning the inside into pulp, and after a few hard rotations the body went limp around the iron. A small chuckle worked its way out of me. The kind of laugh that comes after a stunt you almost did not get away with. And I told the dead bronze treasure chest monster that underwater was where I lived these days. The blood clouded out in a thin red plume and small fish surged in for the spread. I packed the corpse before the blood drew anything bigger, since the mist sea below my sealand still had no floor I could see. I swam to the purple coral I had planted earlier, and the seedling was adapting fine, the first fan of new growth already extending, the scarlet coral a few meters away a half-inch taller than at the morning planting. Both strains were taking. The coral area gave me 1 more wooden treasure chest with a mantis shrimp on guard duty. I condensed an ice crystal shot in my palm and started the kick toward the shrimp. And the shrimp, in the new way the sea beasts had been doing it today, took 1 look at the freezing seawater and bailed off the sealand edge. I packed the wooden chest for free. 2 pearl shells the size of half my palm sat in the last seam, juveniles by the look, and I left them to grow and turned for the surface. I came up out of the water shaking my hair, and looked at the reef area sitting beyond the sealand's center. Of the 3 terrains on my sealand, the reef area had quietly become the most dangerous, which would have been a surprise a week ago when the chat channel's conventional wisdom called the coral area deadliest. The deep-sea mermaid pearl had flipped the matchup, underwater breathing on day 1 turning a coral area into a foraging garden while the reef stayed thick with claws and surprise visits. I cracked my knuckles and stepped in. Reef geometry blocked sightlines and a chest could sit 30 meters off behind a head-high rock with no giveaway. Around the first major bend, a wet sound caught my ear, the tussle of 2 shallow sea crabs in the open at each other. I crept over a rim and saw the pair locked pincer to pincer, the smaller staggering back under the bigger one's leverage. Appraisal returned shallow sea crab on both with the fight tagged mating rights dispute, and a glance up and over showed me the third shallow sea crab a shade paler in shell color, tucked under a reef overhang, the female watching the fight with what I could only read as polite indifference. Mating rights, even on juveniles. I found no chest in the area, decided to lead the brave knights to their courtship, and detoured around. I moved through the reef a slow loop, and then a body the size of a small car came around the corner of the next bend, and we collided. I tumbled and landed on top of the body before I knew what had happened, and the body kept walking. A mantis shrimp's striped back was under me, the long body still walking, the front limbs still working the seabed. The shrimp clearly not noticing it had picked up a passenger. I blinked at the back of the shrimp's head for a beat, and started laughing under my breath. The mantis shrimp's blind spot was the back of the head, and tactile awareness on the dorsal plate was clearly nothing to write home about. I sat the ride out, hand on the segmented plate, and let the shrimp carry me to wherever it was going. The carapace was thin enough that I could make out a fat layer of orange roe stacked through the abdomen, and my mouth watered without my permission. A wet click ahead pulled my attention up, a black iron treasure chest sitting next to a coral fan, unguarded. Mantis shrimp mount with a treasure chest waiting at the end of the trail. Guardian mantis shrimp, the kind of irony only a video game system could write. The shrimp circled the chest, checking the perimeter, and at no point did it notice the small human still riding on its back, which made me feel both safe and quietly embarrassed for the mantis shrimp. The row ended the moral debate. I drew the spear, lined the point with the back of the head, and drove down. The sinking iron spear punched through before the shrimp had time to flinch. I sighed at it, told it that if it had not been carrying a fat row load I would have let it walk away with its dignity intact, and packed it alongside the black iron treasure chest. The day's running list took shape in my head. 1 bronze treasure chest monster, 1 wooden treasure chest from the coral area shrimp's abandoned post, and now a black iron treasure chest from the mantis shrimp's guard, 3 new pieces of high-grade loot from the afternoon, and the bronze treasure chest monster's corpse was its own lottery ticket. I was working toward the largest reef pit on the field, the one I had baited with merman corpses overnight, the spot every sea beast on this sea land should have been converging on by now. I came over the rim of the pit and stopped, because the pit was empty. Not just empty of bait, empty of everything. The merman corpses were gone. The red flower raspora remains were gone. The shallow sea crab fragments from the morning's mask hull were gone. The pit had been swept clean in the time it had taken me to walk the coral area, and the only thing I could see in the bottom was a wide glistening trail of mucus. No way, I muttered. That was a prime den.